So, hello and welcome to the most recent David 67 Celtic News YouTube channel live stream. We've done around about 6 or 7 so far, and there's been lots and lots of debate, discussion, polite, respectful exchanges of opinions, some disagreements, some agreements, and generally quite a lot of fun, often stretching from Thursday into Friday. And hopefully, we can have another live stream like that tonight with lots of participations. And in essence, you are the ones that guide the questions, guide the topics. And I'm just here to try and moderate things, lead the discussions, put up the interesting points on the screen, maybe start certain topics of conversation. And there are quite a few things to discuss at the moment. With yesterday's first Europa League match against Red Star Belgrade across in Serbia, some issues regarding the Celtic team, some rather disappointing performances from some of the players last night, some encouraging performances from some other players, and overall 1 point out the game. Not too bad a result in all things considered. Other things I thought we might want to talk about tonight would be the form of Dyson Maida, the form of Rio Hatate, what the solution is, we think, for Dyson Maida. Did a wee poll on the channel this morning. I've got the preliminary results of that. We'll keep it going for another couple of days or so, just so everybody who wants to vote can have a vote. Also thought we'd have a wee look forward to the game against Hibs at the weekend. 1 or 2 wee thoughts about resting and rotating players, what's going to be the priority for the next 2 or 3 months leading into Christmas and New Year. And obviously ongoing in the background at the moment are the continuing protests and disputes and bad feeling between some Celtic fans and the board, and 1 or 2 new organisations being created, and various different things going on in the background. So, also thought I would share what I thought might be a reasonable starting 11 for the game against Hibs at the weekend, but obviously might depend a wee bit on just who has picked up any wee niggles or injuries across in Belgrade. Some stories that Cameron Carter-Vickers might have picked up a wee injury, although that's not actually been fully confirmed yet, but we'll dare say we'll find that out in Brendan Rodgers' Friday afternoon press conference. So, hi to you as well, Gary Wallace. Nice to have somebody in the live stream making comments. A few people have joined already, so I think we'll just crack on with things. Oops. Evening to you as well, Dexter. Lovely to have lots of people participating. And as I say, the topics we talk about, how things go, pretty much is guided by yourself, and I'll just try and moderate things and keep things flowing and suggest certain things we might want to talk about. So my first thought was, obviously, yesterday evening we started off our Europa League campaign with a 1-1 draw against Red Star Belgrade away from home. 1 point, and as things stood this morning, we were lying 9th in the table. There are some Europa League games ongoing at the moment. All of them pretty much seem to be at half-time, apart from a couple have already finished. And Celtic's dropped from 9th to 14th. And I suspect by the end of the day, probably will probably be around about the mid-table mark, something in the region of 14th to 20th, but certainly in that qualification zone. And our next game is against Braga. That's a home game. Unfortunately, it is a 5:45 kickoff, so it's not very easy for anybody who is working or anybody who's got any need to travel from further afield. And certainly, as things stood this morning, it did appear that Celtic Park might be around about half full for a variety of reasons. Certainly, the early kickoff, not easy for folk to go and see the game. And also, some folk have not taken up their Europa League packages as part of their protest against the board. I think the game against Braga is a game that definitely Celtic can win. Although Braga did start their campaign off with a home win over Feyenoord, I think it was, so they're actually lying above us in the table. But I think Braga, much like Red Star Belgrade, much like most of the teams that were playing in these 8 matches, were pretty much even Stevens with them. I think it's one of these ones where there's lots of teams that we're going to be playing. Good. Hi to you as well, Paul McCoon. Paul McCoon, lots and lots of comments last week. Some very interesting thoughts and some very good analysis. Hi to you as well, Lauren. Hi to you as well. So Lauren had some nice, interesting opinions about the Celtic women's side at the weekend as well. Lots of good opinions regarding the men's team as well. Yep, I think so. Those pretty much reflect what I was thinking myself, Dexter. I think in the end, it was a good point. If I'd been offered this at the start of the game before a ball had been kicked, and we said, well, we'll get a point out of the game, 1 point towards the target of something like 12 to 14 points, which should see Celtic safely into the knockout phase. Potentially, if 1 or 2 results fell their way, could be into the top 8, which gets you a bye into the last 16. And you're entirely right. On another night, Kelechi Iheanacho could certainly have scored a hat-trick. Did score a very nice goal, lovely run and pass by Nygren. Iheanacho, a nice, good, quick control and quick shot on goal. He then also had, just before that, one where he probably should have scored, may well have been offside. It's difficult to know, but certainly the linesman didn't give it, and the goal didn't go in, so it obviously didn't get flagged for offside. That could well have been. And then there was the one where he was through pretty much one-on-one with the goalkeeper, and the goalkeeper managed to save it with his face. On another day, as Dexter's so rightly saying, that could have been 3 goals for Iheanacho. Having said that, though, their striker Arnautovic missed about 2 or 3 good chances when we let him loose in the box. He only scored the one. And Kasper Schmeichel also made a brilliant save, tipping the ball into the bar when we'd given away the ball again. Yep. Lauren, I think you're entirely right. I think both teams probably could have felt, well, I think a point's probably a fair result on the balance of play. Possession was close to 50-50. They had more shots on goal than we did. They had more shots on goal than we did. Sorry, just a wee second. Yep, so they had more shots on goal, but they had more shots rather. They had more shots than us, but we got much more on goal. We forced their goalie into more saves. Touches in the box were pretty much equal. Passing was pretty much equal. Tackling was pretty much equal. They did have a few more corners and a few more shots, although a lot of them were off target and blocked. So, again, as Lauren's saying, pretty much a 50-50 game. I think they could easily have won the game had Arnautovic scored some of those chances. Iheanacho had 3 good chances, put 1 away. there was a chance for Donovan at the front post from a corner that he could well have knocked away. Carter Vickers, after the game, was saying that he had a couple of headers at goal that he felt that he should at least have scored one, and I think the one towards the end of the first half from a Nygren free kick, he probably should have scored that one, and also Nygren, when he was given a pretty good chance by Kieran Tierney cutting the ball back to him, Nygren hit the ball rather too centrally, and the goalkeeper made a good save. So I think Lauren's entirely right. A game in which both teams could have happily taken a point. Both teams could equally have won as well. It's a good point, Paul McCune. The second half was so much better than the first half. First half, very disappointing, I thought. Celtic looked like a team with not much imagination, not much creativity. Dies and Maida up front, rather disappointing. Although, to be fair to Dies and Maida, Celtic hardly ever got the ball into him. He made a few runs. No one really picked up those runs to give him a pass. He got himself offside, I think, 3 times in that first half as well. And it wasn't a good performance by Dies and Maida, but I don't think it was a very good performance by McGregor, Nygren, Hatate, Tunyeki, Yang getting the ball into Maida. Also, Maida seemed to have been told by Rodgers to drop deep, come to the halfway line to pick up the ball and spread things. Not really Maida's best way of playing. He, much like Kyogo, tends to be a player who's best on the shoulder of the last defender and then beating the defenders into the space with his pace, or making good runs into those spaces, and then players picking them up with a good pass. And nobody really passed very much to Maida. Some people were suggesting he wasn't fully committed, not showing his usual amount of energy. Not sure about that. Personally, one of the things that really struck me was the way that he closed down the goalkeeper and nearly blocked the goalkeeper clearing the ball. I think Maida, when he had the chance, showed quite a lot of energy, but I don't think he was really given much of a chance, and wasn't too surprised that he got taken off. Although personally, I would have swapped Maida to the wing, taken off Yang, and put Iheanacho through the middle. I think Iheanacho through the middle worked really well. Lauren, to be fair, Rodgers broke a habit of a lifetime, which was making substitutions at half time. I think bringing on Iheanacho really, really worked. I think he fits into the system that Rodgers seems to want to play now, dropping the centre forward back towards the halfway line. He then acts as a sort of focus for the passing. He then spreads the ball back to midfielder out wide, and then goes into receive the second pass. Doesn't really suit the way that Dies and Maida works. But if that's the way that Rodgers wants to play, fair enough. Evening to you as well. Evening to you as well, Clashman Numpty. And as usually is the case, Clashman Numpty pretty much hits the nail on the head. Hatate all this season has been rather disappointing. He, of course, I thought Hatate last season had a great season for Celtic. He played every game right up until the Aberdeen game in the league. Then he got kicked very late in the game, and then was out injured for the last couple of games of the season, and out for the cup final against Aberdeen as well. Rehabbed over the summer back in Japan. Both he and Maida came back a couple of weeks later than anybody else from their summer holidays, well, apart from Alyssa Johnson, who was playing for Canada, then getting married. But both Maida and Hatate got given an extra couple of weeks of holidays, and neither of them really seems to have hit the heights or really hit their top form since the start of the season. And I couldn't agree more. I think Hatate was very disappointing yet again. He doesn't seem to me really have a role in the Celtic side at the moment. Doesn't really seem to be pushing forward terribly much. Doesn't seem to be really a linking player. doesn't seem to be dropping back to take some of the pressure off McGregor. This seems to be a wee bit aimless and a wee bit not too sure what he's actually supposed to be doing. I don't think personally that the partnership of McGregor, Nygren and Hatate is working at all well. One option might be to have Nygren playing a much more free role, a bit more like how Matt O'Reilly used to do, with Hatate and McGregor hanging back a bit more. But it all seems a bit, for me, mixed up and not working in midfield. I think Hatate and Maeda will both be with Celtic for the rest of the season and then both move on in the summer. Clearly, Maeda was supposed to be leaving in the summer. That all fell through with Celtic not getting in anybody to replace him. Not that I don't think we really could have replaced Maeda as such. So really we need a tactical rethink for us to replace Maeda. Tuniecki has some of the skills that Maeda's got, but not really got the pace or intensity that Maeda does. Balikwisha, a bit more of a slow player. Seems to have lost a yard of pace after he got injured a couple of years ago. I actually thought, Gary, I thought Carter Vickers did well yesterday. He handled Arnautovic, for me, far better than Liam Scales did. I think the problem with Carter Vickers is he does have, I think, sort of long-standing, long-term problems with his knee. He had surgery on that in the summer to tidy it up. Never a good sign for a young man like Carter Vickers to have a knee problem that needs to be tidied up with surgery. And I think he's probably going to be a player who maybe a bit like Alistair Johnson, a bit like Kieran Tierney, maybe over the next couple of months might well be in and out the side, being kept for the European games, kept for the big league games. And I nowadays would have absolutely no qualms at all about Dane Murray coming into the side. Austin Trusty is rumoured to be fit to come back quite soon. I like Austin Trusty, especially in European matches. And I think also, for me, Marcello Sirachi has been a great player for Celtic. I like his intensity. I like his extra bit of aggression. And he certainly does tend to mix it a bit more with wide players and with opposition attackers more so than Kieran Tierney. I thought Kieran Tierney's actually come on the last couple of games, made 90 minutes against Partick Thistle, 80 minutes against Red Star. He defended pretty well. Against Red Star, I think he and Scales, if that's going to be the left-sided partnership, need to develop a bit more of an understanding. And I wouldn't be too surprised once Alistair Johnson comes back in a few weeks' time that he and Donovan kind of go turn about at right back, maybe Dane Murray and Austin Trusty stepping in for Carter Vickers every couple of games, and Sirachi playing a bit more as a deputy, starting the game for Tierney, with Tierney on the bench, or Tierney having a complete game off. Yep, okay. Yep. So I think Carter Vickers, knackered is one way of putting it. I think he has had quite a lot of big games recently. And he, of course, missed quite a bit of the summer, came back very late into training after his knee surgery, a bit late getting into pre-season. So I think he, a wee bit like Maeda, a wee bit like Hatate is maybe, and Kieran Tierney to a lesser extent, is still not quite at their fullest fitness. Maybe the odd game off in between now and the next couple of November time might well be good for him. I see. A lot of people certainly are saying that players are checking out. I think I was saying this. I can't remember. I was saying this in a reply to someone else's comment. on the main part of the channel earlier today. I'm not so convinced that the players have checked out. I think what's happened, and tends to happen rather a lot in Brendan Rodgers' teams in year 3 and year 4 with him as the manager, is that the team talks, the players, the ways that they're told to play, the tactics of formations get rather boring and rather predictable. And I think some of the enjoyment goes out of the way that Celtic are. I think a lot of the enjoyment of the way Celtic's playing has definitely gone out the window. So I can see what you're saying, Stephen, in terms of players having checked out. I think it's more just the team spirit is down. The enjoyment of playing for Celtic is down because of they're a bit bored and stale and stagnant with their tactics. If we think about the time under Ange Postecoglou, we were all energy, quick by kicks, quick throw-ins, quick free kicks, quick corners. We never gave the opposition a chance really to catch their breath. No real chance to get themselves reorganised. Nowadays, we're everything, apart from, to be fair, Sinisalo and Schmeichel do tend to get the ball out of defence quickly to the fullbacks, to the centre-backs, but then it all just dies when it goes to Carter Vickers and Scales and McGregor in particular. Then there's lots of little sideways passes in the midfield, and it never really goes anywhere. So I think some of the enjoyment's gone out of Celtic's players. A lot of the enjoyment, obviously, has gone out of the way of Celtic's fans watching the game. We do have odd flashes of brilliance and quickness when we get the ball forward. We pass quickly, but so often yesterday, the ball would go to Carter Vickers or Scales, and it would be passing to each other back and forward, then passing to McGregor, passing back to Carter Vickers, passing back to Schmeichel, then out to the defenders, and then it was just slow, and then Red Star Belgrade are able to get their banks of four, and it's all slow, predictable. Chinyeki at least does bring a bit of unpredictability. Yes, I think the players are as bored and stale as a lot of us feel the game is. Rodgers has always been, wherever he's gone, fairly methodical, setting his tactics, setting his formations. I was saying, I think it was earlier to Lauren's comment, virtually always Rodgers makes 2 or 3 substitutions at 60 minutes. It's been pretty much the way game after game after game. So to give him credit, we did change something at half time. Very rarely does Rodgers ever change anything in terms of tactics or formations or play lineups at half time. So to give him some credit, he did do that this time. And as Stephen is saying, I think a lot of the Celtic players' enjoyment has gone out of it as well. You would hope that the players and Rodgers and the coaching staff could get that enthusiasm and vigour and stuff back. And I really hope that the game against Hibs, Celtic come out with a bit more fire, a bit more aggression, a bit more of the pace and aggression that we had under Ange Postecoglou when we were non-stop from first minute to last minute. Yep. Lauren, I 100% agree. I think for me, Donovan is our first choice right back until Alistair Johnson comes back from injury. That's hoped to be within the next 2 or 3 weeks, but that's not been certain yet. And I think Donovan is very much moved ahead of Anthony Ralston. I think Ralston's a super duper squad player, tremendously good club man. I have my feeling that Ralston probably is happy enough to drop to number 3 at Celtic, be on the bench, get several games here and there. I think he's quite happy to do that role, much like might well be the case for James Forrest. When Jota comes back, hopefully from injury in the start of 2026, I think Forrest is probably happy to be a player who's on the bench, on and off, some starts, some games as a sub. But for me, you're entirely right. Donovan, for me, is definitely our second right back, and until Johnson comes back, he should be the definite starter And for me, he should be the definite starter on Saturday against Hibs, assuming that he's not injured. So, Stephen, I agree 100%. There is some merit in having tactics and formations that are kind of set and predicted. Everybody knows what they're supposed to do in theory. But what happens, I think, is you sometimes get square pegs put into round holes and round pegs put into square holes. And for me, the best football managers, the best coaches, take the players that they've got and then work out ways to use those players. And so it's very adaptable, it's very fluid. I think Ange Postecoglou, when he came in, did a tremendous job with a rather raggedy squad, a lot of players leaving, a lot of players like Odson Edwards and Christopher Ayer, who both had decided they were leaving during that summer window. He had a lot of injuries to start with, a lot of squad rebuilding, bringing in players on loan, bringing in Kyogo, then very successfully bringing in Maeda and Hatate in the winter window, and then obviously Matt O'Reilly was that winter window as well. And and Postecoglou tended to find ways to use players, reinvented players as well. Ralston, Johnston, Taylor, all doing the sort of inverted fullback role. So for me, there is merit in having set tactics, but I think you've got to keep your tactics changing. And as I was saying a wee bit earlier on, Rodgers has managed. He managed at Liverpool into season 4, got sacked. Managed at Leicester in season 4, got sacked. And little by little, as those seasons went on, Leicester's performances went down and down. Liverpool's performances were rather inconsistent later on, and then in his final season, they were rather poor. And obviously, at Celtic, first time around, he lasted 2.5 seasons and then deserted us for Leicester. And he does seem to be a manager who struggles to take a team deeper and deeper, and does tend to be a manager who takes over a successful team and keeps them successful for a year or two, and then things start to get a bit poorer. And I would be, well, according to the supposed inside sources who claim to know everything that's going on in Celtic world, there are no plans at all for Alistair Johnston to move on. He's not got any plans to move on either. When he was asked about this most recently, he was a bit more vaguer than he'd been before. But in the summertime, he had talked about the fact that he had just got married. His wife had moved over from America to Scotland, and they were planning to stay in Scotland for a few years to come. There are some rumours that Everton are looking to sign him in the winter window. Those seem to have been mostly created by Kevin Colban, one of the ex-Everton players who does Everton-related podcasts and does stuff for Radio 5 and Sky and so on. So I'm not convinced that Alistair Johnston is being moved on in the summer. In the winter window. Oops. Yep, Paul McCune. I personally think that that Celtic should be looking to make Alistair Johnston the vice captain officially, and with a view to him taking over in the longer term. I think he's a player who is much better than Carter Vickers at getting things organised. I think he's the kind of player who would get people fired up. I think he was somebody that we really missed in the second leg against Kira Almaty. I think he's somebody that we missed in the game straight after that against Rangers. I think he's the kind of player who always has that bit of fire and aggression and attack in his mentality. Not a player that's scared to take people on. And I personally think that Alistair Johnston, and I certainly hope Alistair Johnston is with Celtic for another 2 or 3 years. And I could certainly see him being the captain in waiting when Callum McGregor starts to slow down, as I think he already has done. I think Callum McGregor, along with Rio Hatate, has been, and the performances of Dyson might have been some of our weak links this season. Big Rab was talking about that, I think, referring to the game that's going on at the moment between Genk and our cross-city rivals Rangers. I haven't checked recently, but just before half-time, Rangers got one of their players signed off, and then our ex-player O missed the penalty kick, but then, quite rightly, as Rab is saying, O has just scored a goal for them in the 55th minute, so Genk are leading them with 20 minutes to go, so that's some good news for us. Not such good news for the Scottish European coefficient, but it's certainly good news for us Celtic fans that they're not doing so well. Just coming back to Donovan, just very briefly, I was trying to double check on the internet when Colby Donovan's contract is up. It looks like it's up at the end of the season, so hopefully Celtic get in touch with Donovan and his agent nice and quick and get him signed up for Celtic for 5 more years, because I think he is a real Celtic player of the future. He's only 19, I think, and he certainly is big, strong, fast. He's intelligent, good defensive instincts, strong moving into midfield. And I thought he was one of Celtic's best players yesterday. And as we were saying a wee bit earlier on, definitely has moved up in up to number 2 in the rankings of fullbacks. Yeah. But my personal feeling is no player leaves a club unless they want to. So Celtic might well have wanted to sell Kieran Tierney, but no player is ever obliged to leave a club if they don't want to go. Adam Ida could have turned down that move to Swansea and battled for his place at Celtic. I think Kieran Tierney said all these things about loving the club, etc. But I think also Kieran Tierney wanted to move up and try himself at a higher level. I think a lot of players want to try and move themselves up and play at a higher level. At the moment, with the way that the Scottish League is in terms of money and prestige and stuff, where a 3rd division league, if you think that the big 5 leagues in Europe are the 1st division or the Premier Division, we are certainly down alongside the Eastern European leagues and the Scandinavian leagues, a wee bit behind Belgium, Holland, Portugal, etc. So, but Dexter, you might well be right. I'm only a man with my own thoughts and my own opinions. I don't think Tierney left because Tierney wanted to go. If Alistair Johnston wants to leave, Alistair Johnston will go. If a player wants to stay at the club, as was the case with Callum McGregor, apparently there were many teams in England who wanted to buy Callum McGregor. Supposedly, Brendan Rodgers put in several bids for McGregor when he went to Leicester, and McGregor turned all those down. I dare say we'll find out in the fullness of time as to whether Alistair Johnston does or doesn't want to leave Celtic. I personally don't think he will be wanting to leave Celtic for another year or 2. I think he wants a bit of stability in his career and in his life, and he'll be with us for a bit longer. So, coming back to that thing, hopefully Celtic get their act in gear and get Colby Donovan signed on a 4 or 5 year contract. Reward him, move him up to first team squad status, move him up to the first team squad status in terms of to be fair, Clashman Numpty, the problem with a player like Colby Donovan at 18-19 is in that transition spell where there are some restrictions about length of contract that you can give people. But I do agree that Donovan is somebody who Celtic should be getting signed up. And from what I read today in the various different sports news sites, Donovan wants to commit his future to Celtic. So I don't think personally there'll be too much of a problem of Donovan signing a contract when Celtic offer them. And I'm sure Celtic will be offering Colby Donovan a contract very soon. He's one of Celtic's most promising players. He fits the bill in terms of being Celtic trained and Scottish trained, which helps with all these UEFA quotas. And so I think he's very much a player that Celtic want to keep. Well, certainly O has done far better since he left Celtic than Kyogo did. Kyogo had a terrible time at Rennes in France, not had a terribly good time playing for Birmingham either. The ex-Celtic assistant manager, Chris Davis, who's now the Birmingham manager, was kind of having to defend Kyogo in the press. O certainly has had a great time since he moved to Genk. He was on the verge of a massive big transfer. I think it was to Stuttgart, definitely one of the German sides, but that fell through because of medical issues. I thought O was a player with quite a lot of good skills that would have fitted in very well at Celtic, but like many players, he never really seemed to get on Brendan Rodgers' good side, and Rodgers got him out of the club as quick as he could, much like they did with Tomoki Iwata, much like he's done with Gustav Lagerbielke, Luis Palma, and several others. And from what I've been reading, also Luis Palma has been doing very well in Poland. In Lech Poznan have moved him from playing as a wide player to kind of playing in a sort of roving attacking midfielder, second striker role. And apparently he's been scoring goals, creating goals, and unfortunately his last match just got himself sent off as well. Yeah. I'm sure Celtic are doing everything they can to try and get Daizen Maida's whatever's wrong with Daizen Maida at the moment. Is it lack of confidence? Is it not feeling part of the team? Is it not feeling that Rodgers thinks he's worthwhile anymore? It's a difficult one. I think Maida at his best last season was one of the factors as to why we got the double, nearly got the treble, and made good progress in Europe. Be it whether he was playing out wide on the left or playing centrally in the second half of the season, he scored an absolute ton of goals for us. Created a lot of goals for us, and created goals for other people with his ability to get into space. Yes, I think Iwata would theoretically, if we'd had Iwata playing in that deeper role that Callum McGregor currently is forced to play in, being the sort of, in the use an American football term, a quarterback, being that player that playing a bit deeper, that could theoretically have allowed McGregor to push forward up one slot in midfield. You then would have the possibility of playing an Engels or Hatate beside that, having Nygren as more of a roving wide player or a roving midfielder, There are lots. Celtic's actually got a lot of players with a lot of flexibility, a lot of skills. Mikael Ong-Balakwisha has played all over the place in Belgian football. Chinecki to a lesser extent. Nygren has played all kinds of different positions in Swedish football and Danish football. But we seem to be playing Nygren in the position he's played the most rarely, which is central midfield. He's much more often played wide, second striker, main striker, attacking midfielder, roving midfielder. The one thing he's hardly played in Sweden or Denmark football has been what we're doing, which is making him a more conventional centre midfielder. Oops. There were some issues when Tomoki Iwata came into the club initially, just with one or two wee fitness issues and injury issues. I thought Iwata was a really good player, so versatile. You could drop him back into defensive midfield, push him forward into more attacking midfield. He was able to play fullback. He was able to play as a centre back, which he did a few times under Ange Postecoglou. And I think we lost a very good player when Rodgers kicked him out of the club. The way that I haven't actually seen Tomoki Iwata playing for Birmingham this season, but when I did watch him on TV last season for Birmingham, he was very, very, very good, and I would have had him in Celtic's midfield yesterday, and I think he would actually do a very good job organising, and may also free up McGregor to be a bit more like the old-fashioned McGregor. I don't think it's working terribly well with him playing in that deeper role. Just wanted to put up this wee slide. Just move things into another wee angle. So this morning, some of you may be aware, I put up a wee poll on the David 67 site, which was about the fact that Dyson Maida seems to be a bit out of form, or certainly isn't playing anywhere near how he did last season. And the question was what Rodgers should do with him. Keep him as a centre forward, move him to the right, keeping Chinecki on the left and Iheanacho through the middle, swapping Maida to the left and moving Chinecki to the right, which he's played about 10-15% of his career as a right-sided winger rather than a left-sided winger, or putting Maida on the bench and then using him as the first sub to replace a wide player or to come on to play through the middle. So as things stood just about half an hour ago, the overwhelming answer was to use Maida through on the right, Chinecki on the left, and Iheanacho through the middle, with also lots of votes for using him on the left and Chinecki on the right, and also quite a lot of votes for having him as a sub. And very few of us, just 2 or 3 so far, had thought to keep him in the central position. And I think certainly with the way that Rodgers seems to have wanted to change the players and change the formations this season, because when Ida was the first choice striker at the start of the season, Ida was also being asked to come deeper and deeper to pick up the ball and spread the ball out. So almost as if the plan had always been to get Kelechi Iheanacho into the team. So not sure what other people are thinking, but what do other people think would be the best option to do to use Dyson Maida over the next few weeks? Do we think we want to keep him as a central striker, which certainly seems from the poll to be the least favoured option? Move him back to where he's possibly been at his best on the left, which would mean swapping Chinecki to the other side, or using Maida on the right, which for me makes an awful lot of sense because he is a naturally right-footed player. He's not the best player using his left foot. which means Maeda is always cutting back inside. He's never hitting the byline. And some of Celtic's most dangerous moves came when we were able to get the ball in behind the defence and then knock the ball back into space, with the way that and certainly that's the bonus of having Chinecki, who is a left-footed player on the left-hand side. He can hit the ball, hit the byline and hit the ball with his left foot, can cut inside and use his right foot. And I think it does give him and gives us a lot of flexibility having him on the left. And for me, Daizen would do perfectly well up and down the right-hand side, but Rodgers in the past has said that Maeda is only a central player or a left-sided player. So not sure what other people think, but my inclination would be to keep Maeda on the bench for a couple of games. It does give us a bit of a difficulty as to who we're going to play on the right hand side. Rodgers again seems dead set on not using Benjamin Negrin out wide on the left. Actually, not using Benjamin Negrin out wide on the right. Yes, and I was saying this to someone a wee bit earlier on today as well, that that Rodgers does seem to be a player, a manager, a coach, whatever, who does seem to have his favourites, and it's quite difficult to get out of his favourites list, and it's also quite difficult to get into his favourites list. I think one of the few players who's ever managed to get himself onto Rodgers' favourites list, having been one of the discarded people, is Liam Scales. That partly was due mostly to Celtic had so many injuries at the centre-back position at the start of Rodgers' first season back. We lost Welsh and Nawrocki and Carter Vickers over the course of about a week to 10 days, which suddenly left Celtic with just Gustav Lagbielka, who'd been in the club 2 or 3 days, and Liam Scales as our two centre-backs. He seems to be the one and only player where Rodgers has actually reversed his opinion about somebody. Scales apparently was within a day or two of being transferred to Aberdeen for £500,000. Then we got these injuries for those 3 other centre-backs, and suddenly Scales was one of our 2 first-choice centre-backs, and certainly has managed to keep his place in the side pretty much ever since. He and Austin Trusty kind of shared the left-sided centre-back position last season, but Scales seems to have been put back in as number 1, and then now, of course, Trusty's out injured, although should hopefully be back quite soon. And Rodgers does seem to be a manager with his favourites, and if you're not one of his favourites, like Luis Palma, Gustav Lagerbielke, Tomoki Iwata, and several others, you're out on your ear, and for that example, going off to Genk. Yes, the Paul McEwen, sorry, I was looking at another comment, but yes, certainly, I think Daizen did last season go through a purple patch. He did a very good job at the first half of the season with him on one side and Kuhn on the other. They both managed to get themselves into the box to score goals. They both got into the box to support the main striker, be it Kyogo or Ida at the start of the season, or later on Ida. And then, of course, Daizen did a good job as the main striker for the second half of the season as well. And I think possibly you're entirely right. He did hit a bit of a purple patch last season. The expectation would be that he would carry on that good form this season, but be it the unhappiness regarding not getting his move in the summer, be it other factors, whether there's a degree of homesickness for Japan. He's spent obviously quite a long time in Japan over the summer, with his wife and children having moved back to Japan for her to have their third baby. So There could be a lot of different factors with Daisen Maida, but certainly quite right. I think he did hit a bit of a purple patch. He doesn't seem to have got back into that purple patch. He's been in a bit of a blue patch or a sad patch since then. It's a very good point as to, I think possibly a couple of games on the bench might well get him reinvigorated. I think certainly either Rodgers, the coaching staff, his fellow players needs to get Daisen Maida switch back on again. I was saying also to someone else earlier on in the comment section, from all the various sort of social media things, it did feel like Hatate and Maeda had very much bonded with Shin Yamada and Inamura when those two other Japanese players came to the club. There were several social media posts of them going out for dinner together. There was a thing about Maeda and Inamura going to a sort of homeless charity type of thing and get involved with that. So I do wonder whether also the fact that Rodgers seems to have frozen Yamada and Inamura out of the first team squad. They've not really been that close to any kind of first team squads or match day squads for quite a number of weeks. I don't know whether that's part of it, that Hatate and Maeda were particularly friendly with the other two Japanese players, and the fact that Rodgers is taken against those two might be a factor. I don't know. Certainly something needs to get done to get Maeda and Hatate back the way that they can play, be that and possibly being on the bench for a couple of weeks, take some of the pressure off him, get some able to focus on things. And again, yes, it's a great point, because if you were reading the various different statements and what Rodgers has sort of said a bit in his press conferences, that what happens is he and Tidsdale look at players, they refer them on to the recruitment people. The recruitment people then try and sign the players. And then any deals, the green light is given by Rodgers and to a lesser extent Tidsdale. So in theory, Inamura and Yamada are both players that Rodgers was green lighted, but certainly neither Inamura or Yamada's had much of a chance to really establish themselves at Celtic. I thought that Inamura had a good pre-season. His game against Livingston, I thought he was good. He didn't look out of place. Didn't have the most defending to do against Livingston, but his passing's really good. His ability to move into midfield and the final third's good. He's able to deliver a pass, a cross. He's got good anticipation, good pace. I think he's a player who would fit in really well at Celtic. He's an intelligent player. He's 23. So although he's actually quite inexperienced of playing football at the highest level with 2 half seasons in Japan, he's actually he's a relatively mature player for that level of inexperience. And he's also an intelligent player as well. And he's a university graduate, much like Ria Hatate was before he went fully professional. It's an interesting theory. I think Daisen Maeda at his best has the potential to be the best player in Celtic's team. Unfortunately, several of Celtic's best players this season have not been playing as they're at their best, and that could be down to them. It could be down to Rodgers. It could be down to other things. Oops. Just be a second. I personally think Shin Yamada and Inamura are both very talented players. Shin Yamada made his international debut for Japan in the summer, which takes some doing because they have a lot of very good, high-quality strikers, and didn't have the best of seasons in Japan in the season that's ending in Japan at the moment. But the season before, he was very, very good, scored a ton of goals, a player with lots and lots of pace. And I thought the wee flashes of games he had, I thought he was a good player. And I think he's the kind of player that I think would do well for Celtic. So, yep. So nice that one of our ex-players, is doing well, and nice that he's doing well against our big rivals. And I do start to wonder, although this isn't about Rangers, do start to wonder whether their patience, both as fans and aboard, will last much longer for Russell Martin. Do wonder whether possibly the League Cup semi-final at the start of November might be his last chance to do anything at the club. Although they maybe get rid of him before then. One of the questions that does come to mind for me also is quite what the role is at the moment for players like Inamura, Yamada, Osmond. Why on earth has Jamai Simpson Puzzi not made any kind of step onto the pitch? Keep on thinking he's going to get 10 minutes somewhere, but he keep on thinking surely to goodness Simpson Puzzi is going to make his debut sooner or later, but he just gets put. He just watches the game from the stand, keeping Shin Yamada and Callum Osmond and Inamura company in the stands. Apparently, Callum Osmond played for the B team, as did Inamura last night. They both played very well. Osmond scored a goal. When Inamura got taken off, Celtic's defence kind of folded, and we ended up losing the game to Edinburgh. Not sure playing for the B team every now and again is going to really improve Callum Osmond or Hayato Inamura, and it doesn't look like Rodgers has any intention of giving either those two a game between now and January. I suspect if, however, we did get a couple of injuries in the striker position, a couple of injuries in the left back position, maybe those two players would get a go. Yes, Stephen, you make a great point. I'm in two minds regarding Brendan Rodgers. If at the start of the season he'd shown a real commitment to stay at Celtic, i.e. forcing the issue regarding the contract. Now, there seem to be different stories regarding whether there were any formal or informal contract talks. Rodgers is kind of saying no, as is their way. Nicholson, Lawwell, Desmond, Mackay, the financial officer, none of them are talking as to whether anything has been put forward to Rodgers. I do think it's actually, for me, really quite surprising in that Rodgers seems to, from a lot of Celtic fans' point of view, they kind of give him a clean slate and said he's in essence entirely blameless for how Celtic are playing at the moment. It's the players and it's the board. It's nothing to do with Rodgers. I wouldn't be averse to Rodgers staying as Celtic manager. I just would like some more clarity as to what's actually going to happen with him. If he said, as Jurgen Klopp did at Liverpool a couple of seasons ago, I'll be leaving at the end of the season, at least you got finality, you can make plans from there. It's just we're kind of in a bit of a limbo thing with Rodgers. I'm not convinced that he is the best man to take Celtic forward. I'm not sure his tactics and way of thinking and playing is the best for Celtic. I think a bit like a pair of comfy slippers, he fitted fine with Dermot Desmond, one of his golf buddies, to bring him back. I think, as someone was saying a wee bit earlier on, with Rodgers, you kind of know what you're going to get. And to be fair to him, he's won a ton of titles, a ton of cups. With Celtic, his European record isn't terribly good. Apparently, under Rodgers, we've had 17 away games in Europe, 1 win, 7 draws, and 9 defeats. So yesterday was another draw, and we haven't won in Europe away from home under Rodgers since Rosenborg in 2018. So we're talking 7 years. So Yeah, it does surprise me. It does surprise me from the press conferences, with everybody kind of rounding on the board. It did feel as if Rodgers is kind of being got away scot-free. It does from the few things that the board has released in terms of statements, etc. It does appear that both Tidsdale and Rodgers have quite a strong input into the transfers, the loans, the players coming and going. But the board seems to have copped about 90% of the blame. For me, the blame is shared around everybody. I think the board's done things wrong. The recruitment people have done things wrong. The scouts have done things wrong. Tidsdale and Rodgers have done things wrong. And a lot of the players, for one reason or another, haven't got their head in the game. They haven't got themselves physically, mentally right for this season. And as I was saying a wee bit earlier on, sometimes teams and squads going into years 2, 3, and 4 do get a bit stale, and everything gets a bit samey and stuff. And that does seem to be a problem for Rodgers at other clubs earlier on. So it does surprise me. A lot of fans seem to have forgiven Rodgers for all those little things, and all the issues. He's been kind of given a carte blanche. I would be very, very surprised if Neil Lennon got made a permanent Celtic manager again. I think he has got a job at the moment with Dunfermline. He has got a job as a media pundit. It would be an interesting conundrum as to who Celtic would get in as a caretaker manager. I guess it would be John Kennedy who would take over as caretaker manager, but bringing back Neil Lennon, I would be very, very surprised. My hope would be that whoever they choose to replace Rodgers, because I'm 100% certain he's leaving one way or another in the summer, hopefully they'll get somebody younger, more forward-thinking, new ideas, new ways of playing football, playing attacking, bright football. Ange Postecoglou might be available, but I'd be surprised if he came back. But there are several managers out there. Robbie Keane has been doing well. A couple of jobs elsewhere in Europe. Some people were putting forward Damien Duff, although he seems to be the one who's being lined up to be the new Ireland manager when they sack their current manager. There are a number of managers coming out of Scandinavia that might well be useful. That worked pretty well with Ronny Deila. He won 3 trophies in 2 seasons for Celtic, so I think there are quite a number of different options that Celtic could take on if Rodgers goes as expected. Yep. Make a good point. We have had a few Irishmen as our managers. In essence, we had Lennon and Rodgers, and we had Lennon again, and then we've had Rodgers again. So we've had a lot of managers from Northern Ireland over recent years. Yes. Stephen makes a great point. He left us two-thirds of the way through the season. Leicester were safe from relegation. To be fair, he took that side forward a bit, got them high up in the league. They got into Europe. He also won the FA Cup with Leicester, but that was pretty much with the players that he'd inherited from the previous manager, who I think got sacked rather too early. And then more and more as Rodgers was shaping the team into his own image in seasons 2, 3, and 4, the team started to get poorer and poorer. His transfers at Leicester were rubbish. His loan deals at Leicester were rubbish. And more, Leicester went downhill. And Stephen's quite right. They were in a relegation battle when Rodgers was sacked, and they did go down and got relegated. Was one of many players who didn't seem to fit in with Rodgers' way of playing and never really got a chance to establish himself, much the same as Nawrocki, much the same as Lagerbielke, much the same with Luis Palma after Luis Palma's form dipped in the winter break of that first season. I think Brendan Rodgers does tend to be a person who gets rather stubborn and pig-headed and set in his ways, and isn't a very good person for admitting they're wrong. And I think the best thing to do when you are wrong is say that you're wrong and try and make things better. I think what happens sometimes, and has been the case with Rodgers at previous jobs, Leicester, Liverpool, is that things can get into a rut and things can drag on. And because Rodgers is quite a stubborn person, he's not very good at finding solutions and changing the way that he does things. That means that problems can often drift on and on and on, never get properly solved. I think in terms of the quality of opponents and football in Scotland, I don't think it's probably going to affect Celtic in terms of winning doubles and trebles this season. Yep. Yes. So in Brendan Rodgers' last season, we had some rotten. The first time around, we had some rotten transfers, some rotten loan deals. We had some players actually who came to Celtic, didn't play terribly well, and then went off to play very well for other teams. Which again makes you think that Rodgers isn't really the best person for moulding a team around the players that he's got. And it does seem if you don't really fit his system, he doesn't change the system to fit the players. I can't remember who it was, but someone was saying that they felt that when Luis Palma came to the club in August time in 2023, he was quite an attacking player, quite a flair player. Some really good passes, some long shots, some free kicks, a lot of creativity, a lot of energy and verve. And then little by little, it seems that Rodgers has coached that out of him. And again, came in and tried to change the way that Kyogo played, which backfired. Kyogo wasn't half the player under Rodgers as he had been under Ange Postecoglou. And partly because Rodgers kept on trying to change the way that Kyogo played, which is never a good idea. Good. Hi to you as well, Paul Maguire. Nice that people are continuing to join. And Ollie Burke had a terrible time at Celtic, scored a few goals, was largely very, very disappointing. He's kind of drifted around. Can't remember quite which team he's now playing for in Germany, but apparently scored a hat-trick at the weekend. And maybe he's found his team now. Yeah, I think there is quite a bit of merit in that. He made his early successes were at lower teams like Watford, Reading, Swansea. He then slightly surprisingly got given the Liverpool job, inherited a very good squad at Liverpool. Some good early signings brought in for him. They were on the verge of the title, and then he kind of blew that with some really bad tactical decisions, and to quite an extent also fairly stubborn in the way that he was going to play. He didn't change the way he played to suit what was required in the game, and he blew what should have been a pretty cast iron chance to win the English Premier League. And then after that, a couple of years where Liverpool went downhill, and they sacked him in season 4. I think one of the things, Dexter, you make a really good point there, is with the way that things are with the board, with the way that stories sometimes leak out of Celtic, whether those stories are believable or not believable. The only real person who talks much about things going on at the club is Brendan Rodgers. His stories seem to vary quite a bit from week to week to week. There are a lot of folk who claim to be Celtic insiders, leaking stories, or journalists claiming that they know stuff from inside Celtic, and more and more of those stories seem to be just made up. I don't know. Yeah. My personal feeling is you're entirely right there, Stephen. I think we should get some clarity as to whether Rodgers is or isn't staying. If he really wanted to stay, I personally think that he could force the issue with his mate Dermot Desmond. He claims he's got a very good relationship with Michael Nicholson and Mackay, the chief financial officer. Didn't mention his relationship with Lowell. Now that may not be that significant because Lowell is the chairperson, the chairman of the club, and the chairman and the manager don't tend to have as much interaction as he would do when he was the chief executive officer before. The CEO and the CFO have day-to-day input with Rodgers. The chairman is much more managing the board and coordinating things with the board, going to high-level meetings, doing financial stuff with the stock exchange and the shares and other investors and stuff. And so, in general terms, Rodgers and Lowell wouldn't have as much interaction now as they would have done when he was the CEO. But I don't think we'll ever really find out what's going on behind the scenes at Celtic, because I think someone was saying that Michael Nicholson's done one interview in public in the last 4 years, which is pretty incredible. And if he was the CEO in any kind of big business or big organization like hospitals or education, etc., as the CEO, he would be on the TV and in the press all the time, giving statements and giving interviews and explaining the way the clubs are going. Okay. I personally, I don't think necessarily the board are deliberately holding Celtic back. I think there are a lot of restrictions on Celtic, given the fact that we are a Scottish club playing in Scotland. The Scottish League has gone down and down in terms of the finances. It's gone down and down in terms of the prestige as a league. Players don't so often want to come and play in Scotland. We're becoming less and less a place where people go to further their career. It certainly seems nowadays that several leagues, such as Belgium is often a league, Holland is often a league that people go to these days to further their career. The English Championship, one level below the English Premiership, that's really become a league where people now choose to go to take the step up to a Big Five league. I don't think personally that the board have deliberately held the club back. I think they have tried to keep the club moving forward. I think there's been lots of roadblocks to that, one of which is the fact that the ability to recruit players and retain players is more and more difficult every year with the way that football finances is, and the fact that Scotland as a league is going down and down. Our coefficient with UEFA has gone down and down over recent seasons. and it's in the future going to get harder and harder for Celtic to qualify to the Champions League, because we're going to be starting earlier and earlier in the summer for our qualifying matches. But as I say, you might well be entirely, completely, totally right. I don't know. We don't know because we don't get behind the scenes, because the board, as many financial organisations do, tend to keep all their business dealings, their negotiations, their contracts, their transfers, etc., in the background in secret, which is often how big businesses, be it supermarkets or banks or whatever, how they operate is business dealings are kept secret in the background, and they're not shared with the public until they have to be shared with the public. Yes. I'm glad that Iheanacho certainly seems to be getting accepted by the fans. I think Iheanacho, he was very good at Man City, very good at Leicester. His career took a real nosedive when he went off to Seville. Pretty unsuccessful time on loan at Middlesbrough at the start of this year. However, I did think he's a player with a lot of talent, good player, tall player, good in the air, good finisher, good tactical brain as well. So I'm glad that he has been accepted by the fans, because there certainly was a heck of a lot of animosity and negativity about signing Iheanacho. I think personally, Iheanacho was a player that Celtic tried to sign in January, subsequent to Kyogo leaving. But Iheanacho chose to go to Middlesbrough on loan rather than coming to Celtic. Whether Brendan Rodgers didn't convince him to come to Celtic, whether Middlesbrough were able to offer him a lot more money. But I do think personally, and because this is just reading between the lines, I do think that Celtic were lining up Iheanacho to come to Celtic in January on a loan with a view to a purchase, but Iheanacho chose to go and play in the English Championship, and it sort of comes back also to what I was saying a wee bit earlier on, that players don't tend to think that coming to Scotland these days is a way to further their career. A lot of international managers reject Celtic or Scotland as a league for their players to come from if they're choosing international teams. And there suddenly seemed to be, over the summer transfer windows, a lot of players who were just saying, I'm not coming to play in Scotland. I think had we been in the Champions League, as we had been automatically for the last couple of seasons, we might well have got a few players to have come to Scotland, come to Celtic. But I think having to go through the qualifying put a lot of those players off. I think possibly had we beaten Kieran Almaty, had Dyson might have scored the late goal at the home leg or the late goal in the away leg, possibly a few players like Jacob Broom, maybe even Kasper Dolberg, would have come to Celtic because they would have had guaranteed Champions League football. But I think a combination of us not being pre-qualified and then losing in that qualifier meant put all those players off coming to us. And certainly quite a lot of the players who potentially could have come to Celtic, the David Strelitz's, the Matthias Kiesgardens, they chose to go to English Championship clubs rather than coming to Celtic. And I think they thought that was a better way of pushing their career forward and getting into one of the big five leagues. But we'll never know. Certainly one of the encouraging things over recent times is Sebastian Chunetke did seem to be very, 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 very keen to come to Celtic. And there are a lot of stories suggesting that it was kind of him that forced Hammarby to eventually accept Celtic's offers. Because there were several stories coming out of Hammarby that Hammarby weren't going to sell Chunetke for any price. And then it did feel as if somehow or other, either Celtic convinced them to sell Cziniecki, or Cziniecki convinced the management and the financial people at Hammarby to sell him, because all of a sudden that deal went through pretty much at the last minute, on the last 24, 48 hours. Cziniecki then had to abandon his trip off to play for Tunisia to come and sign on the last evening at the last minute for Celtic. Yep. So, oops. Yes. So, Arnie Engels, I thought Arnie Engels last season showed a lot of promise. Thought, particularly in the European matches, he seemed to enjoy that extra bit of space and an extra ability to get round the pitch. He seems to have really, for me, gone backwards this season. He's looked half himself when he's come on. Apart from some good direct free kicks and direct corners, he's not actually contributed terribly much for Celtic so far this season. I suppose he did score one of the penalties in the penalty shootout, so that at least was something positive. But he doesn't seem as engaged, doesn't seem as involved in the team. He seems to have gone backwards, and so I think there is merit actually in selling Arnie Engels this January. I'm pretty sure that there would be lots of teams around Europe who would be happy to have him. I think he could easily go back to German football, could easily go back to one of the top Belgian sides, a team like Bruges, who a lot of people put forward as being the role model Celtic should try and achieve. Bruges, for slightly different reasons, sort of do yo-yo in and out of the Champions League. They have had good success in the Champions League. They then have dropped out the Champions League for a season or two. One of the things in Belgium is there actually are genuinely more teams who actually can win the title. Union Saint-Gilloise won the Belgian league last time, which is why Bruges ended up in the competition qualifying by beating Rangers, because they came through the second level rather than the Champions level. But Bruges certainly are a team that have a very good financial model, selling players, developing them, but they are actually much better at developing their players, which Celtic have not been very good at bringing through young players. Bruges are much better at bringing through young players, also very good at bringing players in and selling them on for big profits like we have done. And they've actually had a similar financial model to Celtic, although they are quite a bit more in debt than Celtic are at the moment. So, yes. So getting back to the point on Engels, yes. If I think we would be probably forced to take a bit of a loss on selling Arnie Engels this winter. Wasn't aware that wrong one. Sorry, this one. Wasn't aware that Bruges had drawn 5-5 last night. It certainly sounds like a very exciting game. The reason I was highlighting that comment was it was the last time Celtic had ever played a Serbian team before Red Star Belgrade last night. Had been against Partizan Belgrade. That game ended up as a 5-4 win for Celtic. The Polish player Jaki Jakanowski scored 4 of the 5 goals. Celtic rather disappointingly gave away a goal with 2 minutes to play. Some poor defending down our right, some poor marking at the back post. Paul Elliott and Pat Bonner kind of getting in each other's way. A free header for one of the Serbian centre forward, whose son later went on to play for Celtic a few years ago. And Celtic ended up winning 5-4 on the night, but going out 6-6 and on away goals roll in what used to be called the Cup Winners' Cup, which of course is defunct now. So it just was bringing back memories of a very exciting game. It was 5-4. Again, we looked like we were going to be going through an aggregate, and then a mixture of Paul Elliott, Pat Bonner not being able to block the shot, the header on the line. Well, Dexter, you raise a very interesting point. Though my whole thought was, if as the protesting fans want, Mackay sacked, Lawwell sacked, Nicholson sacked, and Dermot Desmond sells all his shares, I'm not quite sure who takes over if you sack Nicholson, Mackay, Lawwell, and force Dermot Desmond out. Because it's certainly financially managing a big football club nowadays is incredibly difficult. An awful lot of rules and regulations. Celtic are quoted on the stock market. They've got lots of big, powerful, rich investors. It's a really, really complex thing to run a football club. Celtic have a massive global brand, also as a factor. Celtic also are a club who have a leading role in trying to shape future European football. They're heavily involved in the European Club Association, which has designs in the future to create a European Super League. So I'm not quite sure who takes over. So fine, we force out the chairman, the chief exec, the chief financial officer, force Dermot Desmond to sell his 30-odd% share of the club. I'm not quite sure who takes over, because if you're going to get Dermot Desmond is going to sell off 30%, the 30% share of Celtic, that's going to be many millions of pounds, assuming that he wants to sell the club. He reportedly is selling off one of his other businesses, which is going to get him 4 billion pounds in terms of his bank balance, his own bank balance. So I'm not quite sure whether he would want to sell Celtic. He's also got the option, now that he's older, to hand his shares on to his son, or leave the shares to his son in the will. So I'm not terribly sure where the club goes if we do get rid of the CFO, the CEO, and the chairman, and also the majority shareholder. Because whoever came in would have an incredibly difficult job of taking on the club, getting on top of the recruitment team, getting on top of the scouting team, coordinating, getting a new manager, potentially also coordinating probably a clear out of players in the summer, a few players like Maeda, Hitati moving on, other players maybe also coming to their end of their time. So I personally don't think that sacking Nicholson, Mackay, etc. is in the interest of Celtic. I think getting them to be much more open, much more in public, and explaining the ins and outs, I think that would be a great thing for Celtic. And maybe that's where I personally think the protesting people should be looking to do, is to work with the board, get them to be more open, more transparent, more open in public, explaining all the ins and outs, But that doesn't seem to be the way that all I'm saying, Monty, is I think running a football club is incredibly difficult. And I think there's an awful lot more to what went wrong in the transfer window than is being put forward in the. And I don't think it's actually. I'm not an apologist for the board. I'm not backing the board. I'm just saying I think they're doing a really difficult job. I think they've done a tremendous job of keeping Celtic financially very, very secure. Maybe, and it might be just me, that I remember the feeling 30 odd years ago when Celtic were a day or two of going out of business. And that was a terrible, terrible week or two of my life. The thought of Celtic disappearing off the face of the earth. And whether the banks and the finance people would have been as kind to Celtic 30 years ago as they were to Rangers 10 years ago, I don't know. But they're, according to lots of stories, before Fergus McCann came in to wipe off the debt, invest lots and lots of money in Celtic, renovate Celtic Park, renovate Celtic off the pitch as well, bring in good financial management. Celtic were a few days reportedly from going out of business. The board in those years prior to Fergus McCann ran the club terribly. We got deeper and deeper into debt. We weren't successful off the pitch either. And so personally, I like Celtic being financially well managed. I don't see it as backing the board as such. I think it's everybody in Celtic working together. I think everybody's got their roles. I think board members, chairmen shouldn't interfere with players. You think about Nottingham Forest. They had a really good, successful season last season. The chairperson got involved, starting to tell the manager who to pick, who not to pick. He got heavily involved in transfers, and the manager was forced out. I don't think that's good for the club. There's been plenty teams all around the world where boards becoming so. I'm just giving my opinion. Everybody is entitled to their own opinion. I think running a football club incredibly difficult. Part of the difficulty is that we don't actually know how to run a football club ourselves. We have our own ideas, and I think there are an awful lot of rules and regulations and laws and a lot of complications, and it's getting more and more difficult, especially in my view, because Celtic have a disadvantage because of the country that we play football in. Yes. But if people want to protest against the board, that's grand. That's their prerogative. That's their option. That's their right to do so. I just want to support Celtic as much as I can, and I believe in that case, cheering them on and hoping that they win every game. I was really disappointed over the last week or so to read some comments, now just a few comments, but still not wanting Celtic to do well yesterday in Belgrade. Some people hoping that Celtic have a terrible Europa League and not being successful, as if that would affect things or improve things. I think Celtic doing well on the pitch helps Celtic in all kinds of ways. Oops. Monty, you make a really brilliant point, and it was something we had a wee chat about last week. I think if we could get Martin O'Neill to come in as to be a sort of club ambassador, there are several clubs around the world who do have a famous ex-player, or in O'Neill's case, a famous ex-manager, kind of as an ambassador. Kenny Dalglish at Liverpool has been sort of the club ambassador pretty much ever since he left Celtic second time around when he was working with John Barnes. Since then, he went back to Liverpool, which is where he's been living for the last nearly 50 years. He certainly seems to have a club ambassador role at Liverpool that seems to work really well. And I do think, Monty, you make a brilliant point. I do think someone like Martin O'Neill would be that kind of person. He is a man who's very intelligent, gift of the gab, tactically very, very aware. He is a manager, obviously successful at several different clubs, relatively successful at international level, major success at Celtic. And so I do think that would be a brilliant idea. Whether Martin O'Neill would want to give up his media punditry work, his sort of public speaking at events and stuff, I'm not sure, but I think that would be a really good move for Celtic. Can't think of anybody really otherwise who could take on that role of having that ability to talk in the media and to be sort of a gift of the gab, a very convincing person. Okay. That's that you make a very good point. Chris Sutton would also be a person who has that gift of the gab, quite a personable, convincing person. Another person who clearly has plenty of metaphorical footballing medals, tons of goals for Celtic, scored all over the place, won Premier Leagues at Blackburn. Big Celtic fan, as is John Hartson. I think Chris Sutton again, but the thing with Chris Sutton and John Hartson, they both have to give up very lucrative media deals with BBC, Sky, etc. I'm not sure that they would want to do that, but Chris Sutton, another person I think who could actually work really well as a club ambassador. I think it would probably mean he would have to move up to Scotland on a permanent basis, and he remains living in England. That might be a factor also for Martin O'Neill. I certainly don't see Chris Sutton as being a club manager, a Celtic manager, but I do think as a club ambassador, he might well be a very worthwhile person. But club ambassador, yes, but not a club manager. Yes, I was going to say, and Pat McLaughlin, as he so often does, lots of facts and memories. Sutton did have a very brief, unsuccessful manager career as well. Yes. That was a slightly embarrassing event with Delia Smith at Norwich. And it was very much counterproductive as well. I think she'd had fucked a bit too much of the champagne in the director's box before coming on, but it didn't work. It didn't get the Norwich fans encouraged to support their club. Yes. So Slide Boys is saying my memory of that also was that she'd had a bit too much of the director's box champagne. Tom Boyd certainly has got a club ambassadorial role. Roy Aitken's another person. I'm just not so convinced that either Tom Boyd or Roy Aitken would quite have the international ability to convince players to come to Celtic. Which potentially Martin O'Neill definitely would do. Potentially Chris Sutton might do as well. And Tom Boyd certainly does have a role with the club as a club ambassador. I think it's more to do with sort of fan liaison and charities and so on, but he does have a role at the club in that field. Yes, that's what Dealer Smith said was, where are you? Let's be having you. It didn't work. It didn't get Norwich playing any better. Didn't get them any success. I think she also was, along with her husband, a fairly interfering chairperson as well, and Norwich kind of went downhill. I think Celtic does have lots of ex-players who I think all could do a very good role at Celtic, but I think Martin Neal would be one of the best to do that. It's difficult to know. Something that the Maeda of the end of last season would have scored that goal against Kairat Almaty at Celtic Park, the one where he was clean through a couple of minutes into added time. Daizen Maeda last season would have scored that goal 5 minutes from the end of the away leg in Almaty. If we'd had last season's Daizen Maeda, we would have won the home leg at least 1-0. We would have won the away leg at least 1-0. I think had we taken any form of lead to Kazakhstan, the game would have been so different. But the fact that it was 0-0 at Celtic Park did allow Kairat Almaty to stay in their rather negative way of playing football. Yes, that's a very good point, and I wish I'd thought that myself. Henrik Larsson definitely is a person, if Celtic could convince him to come in and have some role at the club. Again, he's a player obviously who has a name all around the world, quite a personable person as well. Massive fan favourite of Celtic fans. I think Henrik Larsson could be that sort of role as well, and I do think it's something that Celtic probably should have a look at as well. It's very interesting to speculate how Daizen Maeda would do at another club. Kyogo obviously moved on from Celtic to Rennes. That's not gone at all well for him. He's gone from Rennes to Birmingham. That's not going well for him either. Difficult to know. Obviously, both Maeda and Kyogo were massive successes in Japanese football. Maeda's had success at international level, a bit more than Kyogo has done. Dexter, I think Charlie Mulgrew, like any other Celtic fan, Celtic ex-player, has every right to say what their thoughts are, and they can be the same as yours, the same as mine, the same as the majority, the minority. I don't think that Charlie Mulgrew is saying anything because he's a yes man or he's been promised any kind of role at the club. He chose to go and be the manager of Celtic Hearts. There was some talk that he might have been given the role that was given to Johnny Hayes. Instead, Mulgrew chose to go away and be the full manager, the main manager at Celtic Hearts. That really backfired on him. I think he's quite happy doing his media punditry for Premier Sports and so on. But I think Charlie Mulgrew, like any Celtic fan, and he's a big Celtic fan, his son's in the Celtic Academy, his cousin's daughter's in the women's team, his cousin was a good level footballer, soccer player in Canada and in America. So I don't think he's a yes man for the board. I think he's just a Celtic fan like me, like you, like millions and millions of people around the world. And we've all got different views, different opinions. And for me, everybody's opinion is their opinion, and every opinion is correct. And I don't personally think looking for hidden motives is the correct thing to do. I think people have every right to say what they think and think what they say. And as long as they're saying it in a respectful, pleasant fashion, as is the case on all these live streams we've been doing, I'm 100% behind everybody having their opinion. But I don't. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I am just naive. Maybe I'm a idealistic person who thinks the best of people and thinks the best of situations. But I don't see hidden motives. I think everybody who is a Celtic fan, supports Celtic, or helps run Celtic on and off the pitch, I think they're all in it for the best of Celtic. But different people have different opinions. Well, see, Pope Leo XIV giving us really good advice. I think there is a negative atmosphere going on at Celtic at the moment, on and off the pitch. I personally think that's transferring to the players. What's his name? Joe Hart yesterday, when he was doing the commentary, seemed to be sort of saying the players just got on with it. I'm not personally convinced that the players do get on with it. I'm 100% certain that all the commotion and problems on and off the pitch are not doing the Rangers players or the Rangers fans any good. I think that's a bad situation. I think Celtic's also got a degree of bad feeling and toxicity and negativity going around it. And personally, I think the best thing to do is to resolve the difficulties and move on, and all support Celtic 100%. And get behind the players, get behind the manager, get behind the fans, get behind everybody, and move Celtic forward and try and be positive. And I think being positive is the best way to resolve virtually every problem that you get in life. The downturn in Aberdeen's form has certainly been a big surprise, and it was a big disappointment to obviously beat Aberdeen so convincingly a couple of weeks beforehand, and then really poor performance all around by the players. It was kind of a precursor, for the way we played in the second half of last season. We had quite a number of games where we didn't play very well, and the cup final was definitely one of those. We weren't very creative in midfield, didn't really do very much up and down the wings, didn't really give our strikers much chances. Kasper Schmeichel made a pretty poor mistake. Nobody was there to bail him out. We didn't defend terribly well down our left side, which let Shayden Morris in to do the cross that Schmeichel fumbled. Yep. So I think the frustration of the fans is impacting on the players. I felt the games against Kilmarnock, the game against Partick Thistle, Celtic were slow to get going. It took them a good 15, 20, 30 minutes to get going in both those matches. I think it is having a negative impact on the players, and I think it was really very significant that once the Celtic fans got supporting Celtic against Kilmarnock, particularly in the second half when we were playing down to the end, the Celtic fans were mostly at. I think Celtic really got going far better, and I think the fans really did help them win that game in added time. It kept Celtic on the attack. Nice ball in by Donovan to Forrest, who then kicked the ball towards the goal and got handled on the line. Some people think it's a penalty, some think it wasn't a penalty. I'm pretty convinced under the rules that Willie Collum spouts on his Sky Sports thing, it definitely was a penalty, and Iheanacho happily scored the goal, and then fans and players got together, celebrated, and I think that's the way for us to go forward. But other people have other opinions, and Fine by me. Well, Stephen, that's certainly a point of view. I think if one's looking at if we're saying that the board only manages the clubs financially, it's very much in their interest to make Celtic better and better and better and get them to go further and further in Europe, because that brings in more money, more sponsorship, more deals with big sponsors. It brings them in more merchandising. It brings them in more higher investors. It moves the club forward. It improves the share price. It helps Dermot Desmond make more and more money on his shares. But for the shares to keep on improving and Celtic to be financially well managed, Celtic's got to keep on improving. Which is why I don't think the accusation of lack of ambition is fair. I think if you're looking at them solely managing Celtic behind the scenes financially for the money, it's in their interest to make Celtic more and more of a success, do better and better in Europe, more prize money, bigger, higher powered sponsors, better more money coming in from TV, all these things. So that's my personal opinion. Yeah. I think everybody is entitled to have whatever name or avatar or name on live streams. Everyone's got a right to anonymity. Everybody's got the right to their own private lives. So, if we're talking about salaries and wages at Celtic, the backroom staff at Celtic, the ground staff, the admin people, the office workers, everybody got a pay rise last season. Celtic's wage budget went up quite considerably, both for the players, the coaching staff, and for the behind the scenes people as well. So there were significant salary increases for everybody at the club last season. That's part of one of the reasons that Celtic's wage budget all around has gone up. Their operating expenses have gone up, which is also another reason that the board would have been desperate for us to get into the Champions League, because it would have given them probably an extra 20-30 million pounds for the bank. We're obviously going to earn a lot less money from the Europa League, be it in prize money, TV money, merchandising and club and tickets and all these kind of things. Celtic does have for the next couple of years a much more inflated wage budget. Players like Jota and Tierney on high wages. McGregor, Carter-Vickers, Maeda also on high wages, and those are obviously, with most of those players, 3, 4, 5 year contracts. So there's a very major commitment in terms of player salaries and player contracts. Jota was signed, I think, for 6 years. Tierney's been signed for 5 years. So major financial commitments to those players. They're rumoured to be on somewhere in the region of £40,000 to £50,000 a year. So we're talking 2 million, 2.5 million. Rodgers, of course, is on 3 million plus as manager. So that was a £10 million package to bring Rodgers back to the club as manager. And so for all those reasons, it's very much in the interest of the financial people running the club behind the scenes to keep Celtic moving forwards, keep Celtic being successful at domestic and at European level, which is why I personally don't buy the fact that the board weren't ambitious. I think there was a lot of things went wrong with the transfer window, some of which were to do with the transfer people, the board people, the recruitment people, the people like Tinsdale and Rodgers in terms of identifying players. I think it's lots of people were at fault. Well, certainly at the moment, I'm not convinced that Brendan Rodgers is giving us £3 million worth of manager. I'm not convinced that he is. I'm not convinced the players are 100% committed to playing for him. I don't think tactically he is as adaptable and innovative as he needs to be. Monty, you make a brilliant point, and I think it is one of the things that Celtic are disadvantaged in terms of the Sky contract with the English Premier League is in the billions. The German league, the Italian league is not quite so big as that. The Spanish league are not quite so big as that, but they're all way up there. And I did do some research a few weeks ago, and Scotland's TV contract for our league split between all the teams in the Scottish Premiership and all the levels beneath that, plus the Women's League as well. We are something like 40 million per year, which actually puts us below the American Women's League, just above the South African League, just above the Indian League. So Scotland, in terms of TV money, is way, way down there. And the money that people like Arsenal can offer players is absolutely obscene. The kind of money that people like Bournemouth and Brentford and clubs with small stadiums and small supporter bases, the amount of money they can offer players is absolutely incredible, which is why a lot of players who up until recently might well have come to Celtic have been going off to play for Brentford and Bournemouth and teams lower down in England. With look at Ryan Christie. Ryan Christie chose to leave Celtic and go to Bournemouth. At that point, they were an English Championship team. They got promoted to the English Premiership after that, but their stadium's about 10,000 fans. They've got a small travelling support, and Monty, make a brilliant point that Celtic are always going to really struggle. As much as we would want to give players big salaries, if Saliba is getting £600,000 a week, as you're suggesting, that's not terribly much different from what Mohamed Salah gets at Liverpool. And obviously at those clubs, there are tons of players on massive salaries, massive wages. At Celtic, say the top earners thought to be Jota and Tierney, who are thought to be around about the £40,000 a week level, so a couple of £1 million a year. Obviously, what Saliba's getting, if that's true, is absolutely ridiculous. And there's no way that Celtic could ever compete with that as things stand, being a Scottish team in Scotland. Yep. You make a brilliant point, and in I don't want to appear terribly old, but in the good old days, players who were superstars like Henrik Larsson got paid a lot, but nowadays the salaries, the wage levels for players all around the world are absolutely obscene. The amount of money that amount of money that people get paid, the transfer fees that teams pay these days is absolutely ridiculous. And it's, I think personally, as things stand at the moment with where Celtic are in terms of Europe and in terms of Scotland, in terms of the prestige of our league and our TV money, etc., I think we're always going to be playing with one hand tied behind our back. And teams like Bournemouth, Brentford, etc., and corresponding teams in France, Italy, Germany, Spain are going to get stronger and stronger and stronger, because the money is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger for those top level teams. Yes, it's an interesting thing, because for one reason or another, I had some chats with some ex-professional footballers who played for Celtic. One called Pat Stanton, Hibs player, then a Celtic player. He kind of said he didn't really begrudge the modern day players the amount of money that they were getting, but certainly players like if you think Diego Maradona, one of the best players ever, he obviously was very, very well rewarded when he was playing all around the world. But a player like him would be, if people like Saliba at Arsenal can get £600,000 a week, goodness knows what Maradona or Pele or Cruyff or whomever would be getting these days. Yes, so Maradona, absolutely brilliant player. Obviously had his problems off the pitch as well, with drugs, alcohol, lifestyle, diet, etc. But an incredibly talented player on the pitch. So just moving on, what do people think Rodgers is likely to do on Saturday with what do people reckon Rodgers is likely to do on Saturday against Hibs? Obviously, Hibs are a team who have started pretty well in the Scottish League so far. Bit of a disappointment, unfortunately, getting knocked out late on in their European qualifier. But I think certainly Hibs on their day are a team that could give Celtic a really strong game. The question is, where is Rodgers going to bring back Anthony Ralston straight away? Is he going to keep going with Colby Donovan? Some doubts, as I was saying, regarding whether Carter Vickers might have an injury. The fact that he played the full 90 minutes against Red Star Belgrade, for me, wouldn't suggest that would be the case, although I suppose Rodgers did burn all 5 of his subs by the 80th minute, so maybe there wasn't really an opportunity to bring off Carter Vickers. It would have meant keeping Kieran Tierney on for a bit longer. So, oops. So, well, I'm personally not so sure. I think certainly we need to back Rodgers, back the players, support them 100%. I'm not convinced that Celtic have got it in them to win the Europa League. However, it's only a few seasons ago that Rangers under Giovanni van Bronckhorst got all the way to a penalty shootout against Eintracht Frankfurt in the Europa League last season. An even poorer Rangers side got into the last 8. So I think potentially Celtic, I personally think Celtics should hope and aim to get into the last 8. Then you're in two-legged playoffs, a full noisy Celtic Park, Celtic playing at their best. Who knows what happens from there, but I would be surprised if Celtic do win the Europa League, but certainly getting through this first stage, getting into the knockout stage, winning a couple of knockout matches to get into the last 8, I think it's perfectly reasonable. So this is what I guessed that Rodgers might go for on Saturday. Doesn't tend to rest and rotate terribly much, particularly for teams like Hibs. So I thought Schmeichel in goals. There is quite a movement at the moment with Celtic fans to bring in Sinisalo in place of Schmeichel. He's been a wee bit patchy, I think, this season. Made a few mistakes against Red Star Belgrade, which luckily the defenders bailed him out for. He did actually make 2 or 3 very good saves against Red Star, the one where he tipped it onto the bar, and there was another one where Scales let somebody clean through, but Schmeichel came out and blocked it. So I'm not certain it's time to drop Kasper Schmeichel, but I can fully understand Sinisalo hasn't let us down, which is a wee bit similar to Kobe Donovan. He's come in and he's a breath of fresh air. He's got a really good way of playing, good in defence, good at coming forward. And I think he should be rewarded with a place until Johnson comes back. Carter Vickers and Scales seem to be Rodgers' go-to partnerships. Kieran Tierney. Wouldn't be too surprised if maybe Sirachi starts at left back, just to give Tierney a bit of a rest after playing almost 2 complete games in 7 days. I think it might be a time to put McGregor on the bench, but I don't see that happening. I think certainly Hatati's probably due a bit of a time on the bench, so I would go with Engels and Nygren. Personally, I would swap Maeda out to the right wing from central, start Iheanacho and keep Taniecki on the left, which then does give us options like Kenny and Yamada coming off the bench, Balakusha coming off the bench, Yang and Forrest coming off the bench, Luke McCowan coming off the bench, and I suppose there would also be the option around about the hour mark, 70-minute mark, to take off Iheanacho and put Maeda through the middle. That also did work quite well last season, taking off Ida or Kyogo and putting Maeda through the middle. So I think there's lots of different options. Yes, and I think there is a definite Sligo boys a definite. I think there's definitely an argument for giving McCowan a start rather than coming off the bench. He did, to be fair, he did have a bit of an impact in the first game against St Mirren, not being quite so much of an impact in the other games where he's been the sub. And I think possibly having him on as a starting player might well be a good option. So Monty going to go with Sinisalo, Donovan, Carter Vickers, Scales, Tierney, Engels, Bernardo, McCowan. Okay, stupid. Tuniecki, Iheanacho, and Nygren. I would love to see Nygren tried as a wide player. He can play right side, he can play left side, he can play behind the main striker. Rodgers is convinced that he's a central midfielder. I'm not personally convinced he is. His Swedish international manager is not convinced that's what his position is. His managers in Danish football and Swedish football before that weren't convinced he was a central midfielder. I thought coming off the right wing, which he seemed to drift onto against Red Star Belgrade, couple of nice passes. He got himself into the box for that pullback by Tierney. He set up Iheanacho twice. Once Iheanacho scored the goal, the other time Iheanacho had his shot saved. I think Nygren probably is best for Celtic, coming off the right-hand side, coming in on his left foot, having a bit of a roving role. He did that for part of the game against Aberdeen. He sort of did that role to an extent against Livingston, and I think it really worked well. Yep, I would agree with that as well, Monty. I think Cal McGregor is playing too much at the moment. There were concerns with his fitness last season. He does appear to have a sort of chronic Achilles tendon problem that he's had for 2 or 3 seasons. It does appear that Celtic are kind of managing that injury on a long-term basis. And I do think McGregor is one player that deserves and should have more games off. And a couple of times Rodgers has given him, hasn't started him, but then he brought him on against Falkirk. I couldn't really see the point of bringing McGregor off the bench, just like I couldn't really see the point of bringing Dyson Maida off the bench against Partick Thistle. I think both those players could have really done with a game away, game to collect their thoughts and prepare for the game against Red Star Belgrade. And I think personally, players like Engels, McCowan, Pilla Bernardo all should be getting more and more of a chance. We've also got some talented young academy and B team players that could well do with some time in midfield if we're looking to the future as well. And I personally think that Dyson Maida would do perfectly well up and down the right-hand side. He is a right-footed player. I know there is a vogue in modern-day football to have right-footed players on the left and left-footed players on the right. Worked very well, obviously, with Patrick Roberts in Rodgers' first spell when he was here on loan. Worked really well with Nicholas Kuhn up and down the up and down the right side, even though he's left-footed. I think players should actually be two-footed, which of course Tuniecki is, which does mean that we could swap Tuniecki over to the right rather than the left. I do personally think that Dyson Maida would do very well up and down the right-hand side, and then coming in off his wing, like he did coming off the left side. When Ange Postecoglou took over, we had Lee Labada doing very well coming off his right wing into the box. And I do think Dyson Maida would do very well up and down the right-hand side. Also keeps Tuniecki over on the left, where he's had 2 really good games out of 3 so far for Celtic. And he does seem to have a positivity and an ability to dribble and beat people that other players at Celtic don't seem to have at the moment. Yes, really good point, Monty. I think give Tuniecki the ball, which we didn't very successfully do yesterday against Red Star Belgrade. I think they had done their homework. I think they cut down the service to Tuniecki. I think they often double teamed him, which cut down his effectiveness. But in theory, that should have meant that other Celtic players should have had more space, and more ability to break through. And so they didn't seem to really have, as is often the case, terribly much other ideas rather than let's give Tuniecki the ball. So, Pat, you're going to go with Sinisalo, Colby Donovan, Dane Murray, Scales, Sirachi, Engels, Bernardo, McCowan, Tuniecki, Iheanacho and Forrest. Personally, I've been a bit disappointed with James Forrest this season. He seems to have lost half a yard of pace, doesn't seem to have quite the same trickery for beating players. Didn't think yesterday there was terribly much difference between having him and Yang on the right wing. I've been a bit disappointed with James Forrest this season. Been very disappointed with Yang this season. But I think it's a perfectly reasonable lineup, and I think for me the biggest fault Celtics had so far this season is our midfield 3 just hasn't worked. and none of the backup midfielders have really come on and pushed themselves forward to get a starting place. McCowan, Engels, Bernardo, none of them have really come on and had a really good substitute performance. Donovan very much has taken his chance. Iheanacho seems to be taking his chance now. And I think Iheanacho's got a very, very good chance of starting on Saturday against Hibs. The question is who Celtic's going to use in midfield and who Celtic going to use up beside him in the front three. But I certainly do think there's a very much a move to freshen up midfield. Be that dropping Hatate, be that dropping Hatate and McGregor, be that redeploying Nygren out somewhere to another position. He is still currently Celtic's top scorer this season, Nygren, so I would be inclined to keep him one way or another in the team. Personally, I'd put him out on the right-hand side and get him to cut in on his left foot, the way that Kuhn did last season. Monty, you make a really good point. I would agree 100%. Once a player has decided they want to leave and they can't be convinced with a new contract or guarantees of being a first-team starter, I think once a player has decided they want to leave, I think the best thing probably is to let them leave as soon as possible. I think it's pretty clear that several players in the past, Kuhn, O'Reilly, Greg Taylor, Kyogo, all decided they wanted to leave the club. Most of them actually got allowed away within one transfer window. Kyogo got kept for an extra 6 months. Kuhn got kept for an extra 6 months. Greg Taylor, of course, was at the end of his contract, so it was a bit of a moot point. But I do think once a player wants to go, the best thing to do is let them away as quick as possible. I think it can drag down the team morale. It can drag down the team spirit. And some players knuckle down and keep on playing at their best. I personally think that Daisen Maida's personality and the way that he's played for Celtic and played in Japan for his J-League team, I don't think he's the kind of player who would give up or would sort of turn his face to the wall and not play at his best for Celtic. I think he's not enjoying his time at Celtic anymore. I think a lot of Celtic's players aren't enjoying their time at Celtic at the moment. I would not be averse to Celtic letting Daisen Maida move in the winter transfer window. I do think we'd have to get in a couple of players to cover for him, because he does cover the wide position and through the middle. Hopefully players like Chinyetke and Balikwisha will get better and better. Hopefully Jota comes back as good as he was before. There's always a worry with players with anterior cruciate problems like he's had, that they never quite come back the same. And of course, that was the injury that ended John Kennedy's career. A lot of players have never come back properly from an anterior cruciate ligament injury. Hopefully Jota's an exception to the rule. Yep. Wanted fully agree. We should. I think we should probably, unless Maida really turns things around in the next couple of months, I think we probably should cash in on Daisen Maida in the winter window, get the maximum amount of money for him, and then we can see how well Daisen Maida does moving to another team. Will he get better and better? As might happen. Matt O'Reilly, he's not had the best of time at Brighton. He's now away to France on loan. I think he is a player with an awful lot of ability. Kyogo's career has kind of gone downhill since he moved on. Greg Taylor's career in Greece hasn't really started that brilliantly. So Luke McCowan does seem to be a player that Rodgers really sees as being a player to come off the bench late on in the game. Doesn't tend to start McCowan terribly often. And certainly a couple of times, Luke McCowan has had an impact coming off the bench. For me, he's had a couple of disappointing games coming off the bench, a couple of good games coming off the bench. And I do wonder whether he is a player who, if he was a more regular starter, might develop a better rhythm. I think one of the problems for players like Engels and McCowan, who at the moment are forever coming off the bench, is that they're struggling to develop a rhythm. I think that's kind of what Adam Eder was talking about as well. He felt that that he found it difficult to get himself into a rhythm of playing in the team because he was coming off the bench so often, backing up Kyogo for the start of the season, then backing up Maeda for the second part of the season. And I think he found it difficult to get himself into a rhythm. Bit similar to the player we were talking about earlier. He tended to be a player that came off the bench late on in games, scored a fair number of goals coming off the bench for us. And I felt when he was just getting himself into a bit of a rhythm of a few starts, replacing Kyogo when Kyogo was injured, then Rodgers got him out the side as quick as he could, and then shipped him off to Genk. So Pope Leo XIV raises an interesting point. If Celtic were to win the Europa League, do we still want the board sacked? I personally don't want the board sacked. What I want the board to do is to be open and transparent and talk about things in public, explain where things went wrong, where things went badly, and what they're doing to change things. In their statements, they talked about reviewing things. Brendan Rodgers in the press conferences talked about the fact that there was internal reviews. It was quite reminiscent of the way he talked about the same thing in January in the previous summer, talked about internal reviews. It'd be really interesting to see what these internal reviews are going to come up with. We still seem to have Paul Tidsdale. We still seem to have quite a lot of Rodgers' mates in scouting and recruitment. And for me, there was a downturn in our scouting department and our recruitment department when we transitioned from Ange Postecoglou to Brendan Rodgers. Rodgers brought in a few people that he knew from other jobs, brought in a couple of his friends who were coaches as well. And I'm not convinced those have been very positive moves for Celtic. Okay, so everybody's got their opinions. I think personally that sacking the board, sacking Nicholson and Mackay, I think it would be counterproductive. I'm not quite sure who people would say should come in and run the club behind the scenes. I think it's an incredibly complex, difficult job. And I think there's an awful lot of nowadays in terms of running a football club. There's an awful lot of different sections, different moving parts, different things to coordinate. And I think whoever took over as the chairman, as the chief exec, chief financial officer, etc., would have an incredibly difficult job. I think there's a lot more than just spending tons and tons of money. I don't know about other people, but it's quite nice to have some money in the bank for a rainy day. Quite nice to have money in the bank for things going badly. And obviously Celtic this season have to have some money in the bank to counter out the fact that we're not in the Champions League. That's going to be quite a lot of money down on where I'm sure the board were planning to be. which in some ways is quite good because they've got money in the bank so that they can carry on paying the players the high levels of pay they're getting, can carry on trying to expand the club, in trying to improve the facilities, expand the stadium, modernise the stadium. All these things reportedly are planned for the next few years. Well, so to the best of my knowledge, you pay the tax on your earnings, your revenue, etc. The fact that we're paying the taxman that much money, for me, suggests that we're making lots of money. We're a successful club. We have won doubles and trebles non-stop for the last 15 years. So, and admittedly, we haven't made as much progress in Europe as I would have wanted, we would have wanted. But for a person who supported Celtic in some awful years of lack of success in the 80s and 90s, since 2000 onwards, it's been absolutely brilliant, winning cups and leagues and doubles all over the place. The last 15 years have been pretty incredible in winning doubles and trebles. So it maybe comes down to what you want. I think being best in Scotland is something to achieve. Winning cups and leagues and doubles and trebles is something to achieve. I completely agree that keeping on trying to make progress in Europe is something to aspire to, something to reach, but it's not easy to do. As I showed a wee slide we used last week. In the last, so we're talking about teams getting through to the last 16 of the Champions League in the last 10 years. As you can see from these stats, massively dominated by teams from the big five leagues of England, Germany, Italy, France, and Spain. Only in those 10 years, in the 160 spaces in those 10 years in the last 16, 27 times in those 10 years was a non-big five nation in those years. And if we think about the fact that in terms of prestige, money, finances, etc., Scotland is a third-tier club. That's why we're in that level of qualification for the Champions League. That's where Scotland is as a country in terms of UEFA coefficients, and going down and down. And only 6 of those 160 clubs getting through to the last 16 in those 10 years were our level of league. So it's actually incredibly difficult for anybody outside the top 5 big leagues with the massive finances and the massive ability to pull players in from all around the world. It's very difficult to break into that. Last 16, Bruges have done it a couple of times. Portuguese clubs have done it a few times. Dutch teams have done it a few times. Copenhagen did it once. But it's very difficult for the smaller leagues, the less rich leagues, the less prestigious leagues to get that far. So I'm not massively convinced. I think being the best we can in Scotland is definitely something to reach for. Getting as much success. I fully accept our Champions League record is shocking. Part of that is that because Scotland's coefficient is low, it meant for many years we were starting off the qualifying for the Champions League at an early stage before our players were properly back into their pre-season. That's going to be something I'm pretty sure that we're going to have to contend with for next season and the season after. will be starting the Champions League qualifiers a round or 2 rounds or earlier, much like it was when Rodgers came in. And our first game under Rodgers was a game against the champions of Gibraltar, the Lincoln Red Imps, a game which we lost rather bizarrely. And I think part of Celtic, and I think unfortunately for the next few years, because Scotland's coefficient is so low, we'll be starting in early July and starting at a big disadvantage, because some of the teams that we'll be going up against are the Kera Almatys, who have been when we played them, they were about 2/3 of the way through their league season. And so they had a considerable advantage over us because they were so far into their season. Sorry, I was just trying to find the comment about. I can't find the comment. I'm sorry. Well, the snag is going to be that yes, we should try and bring in quality players before the qualifiers, but the qualifiers are going to be getting earlier and earlier into July. The transfer window start would not actually be starting. Would be starting not terribly that far away from what our first Champions League qualifier might have been. Now, it's definitely something we should have done far better this season. I've got no qualms about saying that at all. We got our players in for the most part too late. Negrin, to be fair, was brought in nice and early. Kieran Tierney obviously was signed in advance. If in the olden days, when Ange Postecoglou was the manager and Peter Lawwell's son was the head of recruitment, we seemed to get players in right at the start of transfer windows. The Japanese players coming in at the start of the winter window. The year later, it was Alistair Johnston was in and part of the training squad. Yeah, I 100% agree. We should, which seemed to, all I'm saying is that seemed to be what Ange Postecoglou instituted at Celtic in between when he came in at rather short notice in the summer. Over the course of the next few months, he cobbled together a team, kept us near the top of the table. He clearly had quite a number of targets that he'd earmarked to get brought in. The 3 Japanese players that he brought in, Matt O'Reilly, he brought in from Fulham. Wimbledon. Having been at Fulham before that. Clearly, Ange Postecoglou and the people that were in the recruitment team and the scouting team at that point seemed to be able to get players ready to come in, and the finance people seemed to be able to negotiate transfer deals and contracts, etc., in advance. Since Postecoglou left the club, that doesn't seem to be the case. We don't seem to be able to get players in advance. We don't seem to be able to get transfers done early, apart from the odd one here and there. We certainly got the Kieran Tierney thing organised in January for him to sign in at the start of the transfer window. We didn't seem to do terribly well with anybody else, and it is something just 2 or 3 years ago we were doing well. So something has changed since Rodgers came in as the manager. Is it Rodgers? Is it the people working with Rodgers? Did Rodgers not get on with the people in recruitment? Are there other factors? Yes, it makes a really good point. Maybe we should start planning for, because we know we're going to be starting our Champions League qualifiers, assuming that we win the league, as we should do. maybe we should actually get the players in January so that they're all ready to go in the summer. Brilliant idea, and that is what I hope. What Brendan Rodgers and Michael Nicholson's um, review of the transfer, recruitment, scouting, etc. department, as they claim that they have done and they're doing. Hopefully, that's what they're doing. Hopefully, they're looking back and saying, well, this is the model that worked well under Ange Postecoglou. Things seemed much better organised and coordinated then. We got our players in early. We got our players as part of the team, so I agree 100%. Get 3-4 players in January and develop them and integrate them over the course of the rest of the season. To be fair, last season we kind of signed Jota for that reason. He'd not played terribly much in Saudi football or in France. Unfortunately, at the end of his reintegration period, unfortunately, he got himself injured and out for months and months and months. But I think it's a brilliant idea, and I would agree 100%. It's what we should be doing at the moment. That's what Rodgers implies is the plan for the next few months, is developing and recruiting and planning transfers to come in bright and early in January and plan for the long term. Part of the problem may also be how difficult or how easy it is to plan for the long term if there's uncertainty as who's going to be the manager from the summer of 26 onwards. A lot of players might not want to commit themselves to sign for Celtic in January 2026 if they expect that there'll be a different manager coming in to manage Celtic from summer 2026. Well, Monty, we don't know all the ins and outs of what happens. We are told by supposed Celtic insiders, supposed football transfer insiders, and experts, this is what's going on. All of it, actually, to be thoroughly honest, is just rumours and stories, etc. And a lot of these rumours and stories prove not to be true. Now, there were many stories throughout the whole summer transfer window that Hammarby said they weren't going to sell Chinyetki for any price, much like how Muntiano at Cluj, they set an incredibly high price for Muntiano because they didn't want to sell him at any price. So I don't know whether Celtic are underbidding. But the other thing I would say, if you think about real life, you would hardly go into a garage to buy a car, and the car is worth £10,000, but the car salesperson asked for £15,000. Not many people would buy a £10,000 car for £15,000. You would buy a £10,000 car for 10,000, or you might even look to see, all right, there's going to be a sale for that car next month, so let's sign them next month. We don't know what all the ins and outs, because again, the belief, which is financially and legally the right thing to do, is you don't talk about transfers until they're all done and dusted and the players actually come in. So up until then, what we're relying on is rumours and leaks and stuff coming out of the club, be it Hammarby, be it Go Ahead Eagles, be it Celtic, and a lot of these stories don't seem to be true. According to some stories, Yang had signed for Norwich. That proved to be a story made up by a South Korean football site. I personally would be absolutely amazed. The Go Ahead Eagles person said that we were underbidding for Jacob Broom. That's entirely right. they said that Rangers had done everything that they'd wanted when they signed the Finnish winger from Go Ahead Eagles for Rangers. A lot of people felt that Rangers paid $1 million or more for that player than they should have done. He hasn't turned out very well at Rangers so far, struggling to maintain a place in their team. Didn't play. I don't think he didn't start against us in the game a few weeks ago. So the person at Go Ahead Eagles, he put that story out there. Whether it's true or not true, who knows? Because he may well have had ulterior motives. He may have been trying to force Celtic into upping their bid. It could be all part of his financial jiggery-pokery to try and make Celtic bid as high as they wanted. Nobody else bought Broom. So if Broom was worth the money that Go Ahead Eagles said he was, other teams would have bought him. He's still at Go Ahead Eagles, as far as I'm aware. Nobody else came in for him at the high price, just like nobody else came in for Muntiano at Cluj at the excessively high price that they were charging. So I don't think nobody knows. And as I said, by financial laws, you're not supposed to negotiate and talk about transfers in detail in public because it affects share prices. And most football clubs these days are public limited companies with shares listed on the stock markets. And so things like talking about transfer before they're done is potentially insider trading, which is against the law. And it's supposed to be against the law to talk about mergers of companies in the real world. It's supposed to be illegal to talk about transfers in such details before they're actually gone through. So, honestly, the number of stories I've read through this summer, last summer, of transfers in and out, the more and more I believe an awful lot of stories are leaked by financial people, other clubs to try and drum up business. They're leaked by agents to drum up business. I think quite a lot of agents and players are looking for a move, and so the agent leaks a story. Now, there was a whole string of stories coming out of Turkish football of lots and lots of different players wanting to leave Turkish football. Oops, sorry. Sorry, Anton Rogan's left foot. I've not been ignoring you. Just there's been so many absolutely brilliant comments and interesting things to talk about. I'm not purposely ignoring anybody's comments. Honest to goodness, when I decided to start doing live streams, which I'd not done in the first couple of years of the channel, I thought nobody's going to want to speak. No one's going to want to participate in my live streams because I'm a very small channel. I don't always toe the party line in what a lot of Celtic fans are saying. It's great if there are some people out there who agree with some things I say. It's great when there are some people out there who agree with nearly everything I say. And it's equally great there are people out there who disagree with many things that I say. I'm just giving my honest opinion as an enthusiastic old Celtic fan. This is 53 years as a Celtic fan since the early times of Dalglish and McGrain and McCarry and Dixie Deans and Paul Wilson and Harry Hood and all those other George Conley, the end time for Lennox and McNeil and stuff, and Jimmy Johnson. So good. So I'm glad that someone agrees with some things that I'm saying, and I think that the one thing I would really, really hope that comes out of this poor transfer window, partly is that we actually see how some of these players develop over the next few months, 6 months, 12 months, kind of what Monty was coming back to, talking about buying players in the January to be ready for the summer, July, August qualifiers. Maybe we also need to see how people like Inamura, Yamada, Osmond, some of how these players develop. For some of the players, it is quite a culture shock coming from Japanese football, from football in other countries to Scotland, quite difficult. Some of the players, there's more of a language barrier. I think one thing certainly is Chinyeki has adapted to Scottish football really quickly. He is Tunisian, but also Norwegian. Coming from Scandinavian football to Scottish football is probably easier than coming from Japanese football or Korean football into Scottish football. I think also part of it comes down to the person's personality. Oops. Great. So, yes. So, Dexter, you and I are pretty much the same age. My channel is called David67 because I was born in 1967, so I'm 58 years now. Also, and part of the reason I became a Celtic supporter was young players like McGrain and Dalglish in that squad. And also the more experienced players like Lennox and McNeil and Johnson, but particularly big fan of Harry Hood and Dixie Deans. Really, one of my favourite players at that time was Dixie Deans, and really great memories. So, yes, that's certainly part of the channel is certainly quite a lot of the people who subscribe, view the channel are in their 50s and older, which partly might be why some of us remember the good old days and some of us remember the not so good old days. So, well, Pat McLaughlin, you are a youngster on this channel, so because a lot of us are older. But oh my, right, great. So, it's a channel. It's certainly the David67 channel. It is designed to be a channel for all people with all opinions. And unlike some other channels, I would never ever think anybody's opinion is wrong. I don't claim ever to be an expert. Just an enthusiastic fan. I don't claim any special abilities, any special knowledge. Just an enthusiasm and love of the club. Yes. So, just coming back to starting supporting Celtic, one of the things that I got for my 5th birthday was a Celtic strip, a big football, and also a big poster of Kenny Dalglish to put on my wall. So it was a brilliant 5th birthday that year, getting all those Celtic things. And there's a picture that's still on my brother's wall of me wearing that Celtic strip with the big football that was nearly as big as me at that time. And he still shows me that picture quite often on his wall of his house. So, yes. So in those days, it was always very easy to get me a present because a slightly different first poster. Certainly, my first poster was of Kenny Dalglish, and Ken Dalglish remained on as my poster on my wall pretty much from my 5th birthday until he left the club in 1977, and that was part of the reason that I started to become a Liverpool fan in 1977, partly because Dalglish had moved there, but also there'd always been quite a strong link between Celtic and Liverpool through the years. Shankly and Steen obviously being big friends from the same sort of lifestyle and locality in Ayrshire before that as well. So personally, I think Celtic are at the moment. I think Celtic aren't right on the pitch, not right off the pitch. I think there's so many different factors going on, and I think one of the main things is, for one reason or another, the players aren't playing at their best. I don't think they're enjoying themselves at the moment, and I think Rodgers needs to earn his £3 million a year and getting the team very quickly playing as one, playing as a team, and starting to play better and better football. Hopefully he can do that. I, as always, remain very optimistic and hopeful for the season. I do see us at the end of the season winning a double or a treble. That's partly due to the fact that it would appear there's not terribly much challenge in Scotland from the other teams. Hearts certainly seem to have started well so far this season. I think they're probably going to be a bit like Aberdeen were last season. Aberdeen started really well last season and then got to about Christmas. Then injuries and fixtures and suspensions and loss of form all started to pile up. And I'm not convinced that Hearts are going to be able to improve their squad in the winter. And I think Hearts will probably fall away. Hibs, I think, look a very good team, good bunch of players. They're well managed. I think they might actually prove to be our best rivals, our biggest rivals. But again, much like other teams in Scotland, I think they'll struggle with injuries, suspensions, and fixture pile-ups as we go through the winter. I think Celtic are probably the best placed in terms of squad, best placed in terms of backups. And I think personally, and maybe I'm just hoping for the best, maybe I'm just being overly optimistic and overly forgiving of people, I think Celtic will look to adopt what Monty was saying earlier on and look to both reinforce the squad for the second half of the season. I think we might well lose a player or two in the winter transfer window, especially if Dyson Maida and Rio Tato don't improve in their form. I think possibly if they don't start improving in terms of form and performance and their sort of mental side of things, I think certainly Hatate and Maida might well move on. I think one way or another, both of them will be moving on next summer. But possibly if they don't turn things around, they might be leaving earlier. So I think Celtic will need to bring in some extra players to cover for them, either for straight away or, as Monty was suggesting, planning for the future, planning for a few months down the line. Yes. Jimmy Johnson, obviously, brilliant play for Celtic. When I started supporting in Celtic, his career was just starting to ebb away a wee bit. Obviously, he was at Celtic for a few more years after that, but I don't think it was quite the same player as we got deeper and deeper into the mid-70s. But still, an absolutely brilliant player for Celtic. Some of the Celtic's greatest ever performances had him as the central player. Yes, so Jimmy Tilleen, certainly. I think he winning the cup during the summer during in May, really did maintain his job at Aberdeen. He also, because they had won the cup, it guaranteed them having Europa Conference League football at the very least. I think that also has helped him stay in a job. They've started the season really poorly. I do wonder. I think there is certainly nowadays in management, there's much more of a quick turnaround of managers. If you think round about this time last season, David Gray at Hibs was destined to be sacked. He managed to start turning the team around about October, November time, but he reportedly was very close to being. He was very close to being out of a job. I think probably Aberdeen will be. Loyal to Jimmy Tilleen and give him the rest of the season. Although possibly if the Europa Conference League doesn't go terribly well and they're not really improving much by winter time, he might be gone then as well. But in essence, I don't really see any of the other teams in Scotland giving us a challenge this season, and that partly is also why Scotland's coefficient is going down and down with UEFA, is that the general quality of Scottish football has gone down and down over the last 5 years. It's becoming harder and harder for teams like St Mirren and Kilmarnock and Dundee United and Dundee, etc., to recruit players and keep players. I think, unfortunately, that's going to probably keep on getting worse and worse. And the gap between them and Celtic is going to get bigger and bigger. And I think probably Rangers are the only team financially and in terms of resources who can keep up with Celtic, but they have the potential to get further and further away from us as well. Well, I didn't actually fully research this, but somebody did say on, I think it was the BBC Scotland site, that Rangers could actually drop into the relegation zone if results don't go their way this weekend. I think they obviously will be playing on the Sunday, so I think possibly they were saying that when Rangers start their game on Sunday, they could well be in the relegation spots. I think the teams at the bottom of the league are all rather bunched up. Well, there is a theory to that as well, that possibly if Rangers were in 12th or 11th place, they might change the rules. They have obviously been talking for years and years about changing the size of the various different divisions in Scotland, or promoting some of the sort of non-league Division 5 effectively teams into the bottom division. That they may well change the rules. If Rangers were to come 12th or 11th, they maybe would change the rules for next season to keep them in. Yes, I think that Dexter make a brilliant point. Now, when Hibs did beat us 2-1 last season, that was the game where there was the very controversial disallowed goal, which should never have been disallowed by VAR. Hibs in that game did start the game very well. Celtic started the game very, very poorly. Hibs got themselves on top nice and early. And I 100% agree. I would really love Celtic to come out, as they so often have done over the last few seasons, and really blitz the other team in the first 10, 15 minutes. Even if they don't score in those first 10, 15 minutes, if they really get on top, put the other team on the back foot, knock them out of their pre-planned tactics and formations and stuff, really go on the front foot and take them on. I think that is the best way for Celtic to beat people. And sadly, this season, we have, in nearly every game I can remember so far, we've started poorly, taken a long time to warm up. Some games we've not really warmed up at all, such as the Kerry Almaty games or the Rangers game. A few games, like the Livingston match, Kilmarnock match to a lesser extent, we did get better and better. Yeah, the fact that Rangers survived being, in essence, bankrupted in 2012, there was an awful lot of factors that went in there and very much went in their favour. A lot of creditors didn't demand their money the way they should have done. Quite a number of court cases went Rangers' way as well. And by normal rules and regulations, they should really have been close to, they should actually really have lost Ibrox, lost Murray Park, lost the greater part of the squad. It should really have knocked them back years and years and years and years. Instead, they got demoted to the bottom division, but they got to keep their training venue, they got to keep their manager, keep much of their playing staff, keep their football stadium. They got to keep all their trophies and achievements. And I'm not convinced that any other team would have been given so many benefits and compromises as they did that season. And I certainly don't think when Celtic were in a similar position around about 1994, I don't think Celtic would have had the same bending were backwards to help them that Rangers did in 2012. Yep, it certainly was nice to see. I liked O as a player. I think he had a future at Celtic, but the important person was Rodgers, who didn't think he had a future at Celtic, and certainly he's gone on to great success at Genk. And even though he did miss a penalty in that game, he did come back in the second half to score what I think proved to be the winner. And I think certainly for those who do have Rangers fans as work colleagues, etc., it certainly does give something to talk about. So I do think that the next couple of games for Celtic are going to be actually quite a good sort of thermometer for how Celtic are going to be for the season. I think Celtic's performance against Red Star Belgrade showed definite signs of some improvement, especially in the second half. We are actually defending very well at the moment. We've only conceded 3 goals in 10 games so far this season, which is quite an admirable record, especially because we have had 1 or 2 wee changes in most of the positions in the back four. We've obviously missed probably our best right back with Alistair Johnson dropping out, then Anthony Ralston dropping out. Luckily, Donovan's come in and been a big breath of fresh air. There's been some backward and forward and changes with Kieran Tierney on the left-hand side. To start with, Liam Scales was swapping from left centre-back to left-back. And then Trusty got himself injured. So we have had quite a lot of changes in defence. So having only 3 goals in 10 games is actually pretty good. I'm not sure whether the stat is correct. I did see it earlier on today that the last time that Celtic conceded just 3 goals in the first 10 games of the season was in John Barnes' time in 1999-2000. Obviously, that season very quickly went down the plug hole. But according to the stats site I was reading today, Celtic had an equally good start that season, 3 goals in 10 games. Hopefully we don't go down the plug hole like John Barnes did, losing to Inverness, Cali Thistle, etc. I think we need to stay clear of any kind of potential legal issues regarding other clubs' managers. There are certain rules and regulations on YouTube as to what we can broadcast or not broadcast as an official part of the channel, so we'll stay clear of all the ins and outs there. Yes, yes, Ken Dalglish was our first director of football. I'm not convinced that worked out terribly well. I'm not convinced that Ken Dalglish was really cut out to be a director of football. He certainly had a pretty successful career before as yes, I think we'll move back to. Yes, I'm not disputing Dexter that what is said about him is true. I'm just saying there are legal things that we're not supposed to do on YouTube. It stops your channel getting monetized. It puts restrictions on your channel. So I don't want to do that, because I do quite enjoy doing videos most days. I do really enjoy doing the live streams. I do love responding to people's comments and having a nice chat and debate. So I'm not disputing that the stories about Martindale are true. I'm just saying I need to try and stay clear of it. Yes, Stilian Petrov, one of the good things to come out of the John Barnes era. Ken Dalglish briefly took over as manager, and then, if one's being honest, that after that, Celtic got better and better and better. So, and 2000 onwards is when Celtic's renaissance kind of happened, and since 2000 we've been dominating Scottish football, particularly, as I said earlier on, the last 15 years or so. Not convinced that Dalglish's best role was as director of football. I think he was more of a player to work with good coaches, be kind of as a person to attract top quality players to come to the club. He clearly worked very, very well at Blackburn, took them to their one and only English Championship. He'd been a big success at Liverpool as a player manager than a manager, although he did have a lot of very good backup coaches in the background to help him out. So not convinced that Dalglish was the best director of football, and also a lot of the rumours were that he didn't actually spend an awful lot of time either as the manager or as director of football actually in Glasgow. He spent quite a lot of the time on the golf course with Alan Hansen and Graham Souness and stuff back home in Liverpool. But certainly one of the big bonuses of the John Barnes era certainly was Stilian Petrov. Big fan of Stilian Petrov, both as a player and then now that he's back as a pundit. He tends to speak his mind, a bit like John Hart's, and Joe Hart for that matter. They do come over as massive big Celtic fans. Don't think Stilian Petrov is frightened to say what he thinks is the right thing, which I think is always the best thing to do when you're being a footballer. I think he's got good tactical knowledge. I think he's a player that probably could have gone on to be a good manager. However, he's chosen to take over a media role instead, and he is actually one of my more favourite media pundits, and is still quite pro-Celtic in his comments, but not nearly as pro-Celtic. I say as pro their old club, as several of the ex-Rangers players are, like the Chris Boyds, who don't seem to see anything other than a decision favouring Celtic. To me, it's also quite interesting in that the way that the San Francisco 49ers financial group, when they took over Rangers in the summer, the way that they instituted their transfer policies and their other things was kind of to copy the way that Celtic were managing things. They've been a lot more financially planning, longer term planning, not overspending their budget, which of course was a massive problem that Rangers got into for years and years and years, spending money they didn't have, which is why they went bankrupt, which is why they nearly went bankrupt a second time. That's why they nearly bought over by the San Francisco 49ers. They certainly do seem to believe in running the club as a financially sustainable model. They've bought a few players, they've sold a few players, they've brought in quite a few players on loan as well. And so far, it hasn't worked for them. Yes. In theory, when Barnes and Dalglish came in as a 1-2 punch, a manager and director of football, it did seem like a very good move for Celtic. To be fair, John Barnes hadn't had an awful lot of experience, or I think had actually no experience as a manager before coming to Celtic. It's probably too big a job, I think, to take over being a Celtic manager without any previous experience, which could be one of the problems that Celtic has. If and when Brendan Rodgers does move on, is quite who we get in to replace him. Not sure that Scott Brown's done quite enough at Ayr to move in, but there aren't actually terribly many other ex-Celtic players who are doing well as managers elsewhere. Yeah. The question might be actually also, Paul McEwen, is if Kenny Dalglish, as director of football, had given John Barnes full-time support throughout the season, maybe Barnes would have adapted and learned on the job and got better and better. Difficult to know because, as I say, apparently Dalglish spent quite a lot of his time down at home in Liverpool and not so much time helping out at Celtic. Yes, no, there's lots of different factors. Henrik Larsson had a leg break. There was a lot of different things went on at Celtic at that time. So, and kind of coming back to what we've been talking about earlier on today, or earlier on yesterday, actually, because yesterday is now well, today is now well, today is now what was tomorrow yesterday, if you know what I mean. Things going wrong tends to be lots of different factors all happening at the same time. Sometimes it can be just one single factor makes things go south or go badly, but it tends to be multifactorial. There have been rumours on a really continuous basis that Russell Martin's going to get sacked. I'd be massively surprised if that they wouldn't go for a bigger name manager to replace him. I keep on hearing stories that Steven Gerrard's going to come back and manage Rangers. I'm not fully convinced that's going to be the case either. One of the problems that Rangers have got, of course, with their manager is that they've got a pretty major financial commitment in with him. They gave him a big contract, rumoured to be about $1.5 million per year. So obviously, if they were to sack him now, there would be several million they'd have to pay to pay his contract off. So it would be financially quite a difficult situation for them to sack him at this point. But and also the question is, quite who would take them on? Would people like Ferguson and McCann and Billy Dodds, etc., come back to manage again? Yes, again when they were financially really went out of business. Again, they were still paying people like Souness and Walter Smith and Advocat for paying their contracts off years and years and years later. Yes, I think Steven Gerrard was quite lucky in terms of being a Rangers manager. He was manager at a time where Celtic were going down and down. I think, again, a wee bit similar to what might be going on at Celtic at the moment. Quite a number of players had been at the club for quite a number of years. They'd heard the same kind of stories and messages and team talks. They'd been in the same side. Celtic hadn't really been rotating and moving their team forward, refreshing their team. And that season that started under Neil Lennon and finished under John Kennedy was a rather poor season. Of course, there was all the problems with COVID. A lot of players were quite isolated away from their families, having to kind of live in quarantine and all kinds of things. So I think it was a very complicated, quite a complicated time. Yes, Lou Macari again. When he was just leaving Celtic, I think when I started supporting Celtic way back in the early 70s. I was actually quite hopeful when he came back to Celtic as the manager. He had pretty good success in English football. But as Sligo Boy is saying, Macari wasn't actually at Celtic in terms of on the training pitches, etc. very often. He seemed to spend a couple of days or more every week down at his home in the Midlands and came up to Celtic for a day or two before the games were being played. And I think that had a knock-on effect, and Celtic had a terrible time under Macari. And much like Liam Brady, things didn't go well for him either. So I do think Celtic, when they do move on from Brendan Rodgers, sooner or later, I think they do need to get in a manager with experience, a manager who's managed at a high level, not necessarily the highest level, but certainly a high level. And I'd be hoping that Celtic get a young-ish manager who's had success elsewhere, who can take Celtic forwards. I think under Brendan Rodgers, we've kind of gone backwards a bit personally, and we've kind of lost a lot of the momentum and innovation that we developed under. Yes, so Paul McCann, I think we're talking about the player that Rangers bought from Everton. He played something like 20-odd games for Everton before he came to Rangers, scored no goals for Everton, but even his number of goals in Portuguese football before that were rather poor. He's got a terrible, terrible record. Now, admittedly, Iheanacho hadn't scored many goals playing for Seville, scored one goal playing for Middlesbrough in his loan spell, but he at least did have a really big back catalogue of goals for Man City, and then particularly for Leicester. And I actually was quite positive about Iheanacho coming in. I don't think the circumstances were very good in terms of public relations. I think had we signed Kelechi Iheanacho in July, I think a lot of Celtic fans might have been a lot more accommodating and welcoming to him. I think it all felt rather last. Well, obviously it was last minute because we signed him the day after the transfer window finished. But as I said, I do think the seeds of the Iheanacho signing were actually made in the January, but in January, Iheanacho chose to go to Middlesbrough rather than coming to Celtic. And goodness knows, maybe if he'd come to Celtic in January of this year, maybe he would have been fully part of the Celtic squad and could have led us in the Kira Almaty games. Neither Maeda nor Ida did terribly well in those two games. Both of them obviously missed their penalties in the penalty shootout. Iheanacho so far has a 100% success rate taking penalties for Celtic. So long may it continue. And I personally do hope that Iheanacho gets better and better. I hope also early in the new year, given the fact that Iheanacho's on a 1-year contract with a 1-year option, hopefully Celtic do try and sign him in the longer term. Because I think Iheanacho, he's only 28, 29, so he's still got a good few years left in him at the highest level. He's younger by 2 or 3 years than Kyogo, who in theory is one of the players that he replaced. And so maybe if we'd signed Iheanacho in January 2025, maybe things would have been so different this summer against Kira Almaty. But then if Daizen Maeda had taken those 2 brilliant chances, which he failed to do, again, the season and the positivity and the surrounding atmosphere at Celtic would be so different now. So I think we're now into Friday morning. I think, yep, it's gone midnight. It's nearly midnight on Friday morning. So we've been going for the best part of 3.5 hours. So I think we should maybe start to yes, so I completely agree, David. Winding things up now, I'm just saying that we've been going for 3.5 hours. I think we can start to end things. All I was going to say is, obviously, next Thursday we are playing Braga in the second Europa League game. That's going to be our first home game of the season. That is a 5:45 kickoff, and so the game will be finished by 8 o'clock. So my plan was still to do 9 o'clock live stream next Thursday, and a couple of our other Europa League games will be at 5:45 on Thursday. So I was planning to do live streams again at 9 o'clock those evenings. There will be times that we might need to move the live stream to a later time or to a different night, but I'll keep you all up to date with that as we go through. Yes. So I'm very hopeful that Iheanacho will keep on scoring for Celtic. He's had a good start for Celtic so far, a couple of goals so far for Celtic. Thought his performance in the second half was really good against Red Star Belgrade, and hopefully he can keep on scoring goals, and hopefully Celtic can convince him to stay with the club for 2 or 3 years, which also then allows players like Yamada, Kenny, Osmond to learn underneath him and come through to be Celtic starters in a few years' time. So, as I said, we've now gone past 12:30, so I think we will call it a day. Thank you for everybody who has contributed. Thank you for everybody who has kept things going through the comment section. Thanks for all your brilliant ideas and brilliant opinions. Thanks for the brilliant, friendly, respectful spirit of the live stream. It's really nice participating in these sorts of things. So I will call it a night. Thank you very much for everyone contributing. It would be great to speak to you all again next Thursday. Hopefully next Thursday we are celebrating Celtic winning against Braga in our first Europa League match. Be quite interesting to see Gustav Lagerbielke coming back to the club. We'll see whether he gets a start for for Braga that night. He's not been starting every game for Braga so far. Be quite interested to see quite how he does. So goodbye to everybody. Thanks for everybody, and we'll finish off by saying good luck, Celtic, in your game against Hibs on Saturday, and and thank you very much for all those compliments as well. Always great to hear positive feedback. It makes things so much more fun to do. Thanks to everybody, and goodbye, and hail, hail.